live early today, still from my home. It's not like I'm somewhere else, but I do have to be somewhere else in a few hours. So I can't be live at 6 p.m. I have some other work to do for someone else, a family friend, after the show is over. And then I have to be on my way up north. So that's why I'm live at 2:53 p.m. Eastern Time, 3 hours and 7 minutes earlier than usual. Again, normally Wednesdays are live at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, same with Sundays and Mondays. Schedule's been a little bit off recently, but we're still going live, and yeah, we're here. So make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, make sure to hit that notification bell, and stay tuned, because this is a massive show. Talking Penn State, Oregon, Michigan, Ohio State, Nebraska, and USC predictions. Going to be spending around 10 minutes on each team. Talking about my record predictions, some anywhere from mild to, I would say, hot takes or bold predictions that I have for each team. And outside of that, we're going to be talking about Georgia's coaching, Texas's defense. I'm going to be answering 5 questions that you all submitted to me via the Discord server. And I encourage you to join the Discord server via the link in the live show description or video description after it's live and posted as a video. In that description, join the Discord server. It's free, doesn't sign you up for anything other than getting a notification through Discord when I upload a video. That's kind of it. It's free, and if you ask a question in the hashtag YouTube mailbox channel, well, I'll make a video out of your question. And these questions, you know what they're going to be about today? Matt Patricia's defense, Georgia Tech, and what I think about them. I want to discuss why this is a make-or-break year for Luke Fickell at Wisconsin. We're talking about Notre Dame, and even though I'm not the highest person on Notre Dame, there are reasons to be high on Notre Dame if you disagree with me. So we're going to talk about the positive side of Notre Dame and some Big Ten trap games, whether or not each Big Ten team has a game or series of games that they should not be overlooking for a variety of reasons. So that is the plan for today. Some housekeeping before we get started. Number one, Alabama recruiting shooting up. Just absolutely on fire. Oregon has a good offensive line class right now. Got a 3-star offensive lineman and a top 100 4-star, close to 5-star caliber offensive lineman earlier today. They are in the running for Emmanuel Ahianacho and for a plethora of other players like Tyler Atkinson, 5-star at linebacker, for example. Oregon recruiting has gone nowhere. It's the same thing with Alabama, same thing with Ohio State, even though they didn't even start out low. They've started out hot, and they've cooled simply because they aren't getting commits. Like, there's nothing to be worried about if you're one of these top 6 recruiting programs. Oregon's gaining momentum, Alabama's gaining momentum. You should be worried, though, if you're an Auburn fan. Auburn has no recruiting juice, and it's a do-or-die season. It comes across to me in the same way that, honestly, Florida State, to a certain degree, does, although they're having some success in recruiting. More so it comes across to me like Oklahoma and how Oklahoma's recruiting, where they currently have fewer blue chippers in their class than 3-stars, and they don't have any 5-stars or players who are close to, like, as in, like, really close to 5-stars right now. I think they have maybe a top 100 player or two, but Auburn and Oklahoma, they have to have huge years. They have to. If they just go, Oklahoma 7-5, Auburn 8-4, they're going to continue to bleed roster talent, in my mind, or their roster talent is going to be capped at a certain level that ultimately won't produce the annual records that the fans and the administrations want out of their head coaches. If you're Auburn and Oklahoma, with the schedules you have, with the expectations you have, with the way you used to recruit and are recruiting now, you must have a huge year to regain momentum and set up a path, a foundation for long-term success, not just extending your contract by 1 year and hoping that you can have like a flukishly big year to give you some space. You need to have consistency. You need to show up. I think to a certain degree they will, but I also question how much they will with their tough schedules and the fact that I do think they have a good amount of limitations, if I'm being honest. And last but not least, SMU recruiting. They got an offensive lineman over Ohio State a few days ago and then a linebacker over Michigan the other day. SMU, I've talked about it with Bald Father Betts. Search up his name, Bald Father's one word, space and Betts. You'll find his name that way. It's two black B's and then a white background. He's told me before that he believes in SMU as a program. He's a trusted friend, and I would say source even to the channel. I know that others believe in this. SMU has deep pockets. SMU has resources. They have a good coaching staff. I am not as shocked as many others are that SMU has been able to hold off players from even the likes of Ohio State or Michigan or bigger schools. That it's a pleasantry. It makes me happy because I like to see other schools besides just the Blue Bloods succeed. However, it's not necessarily surprising to me. Maybe a little bit shocking, but as in, whoa, I didn't see that coming. No, I mean, they have money. They have so much money. They're not taking any money from the SEC, and yet they're signing some of the better ACC caliber recruiting classes. They've been able to keep their players, the good ones, from entering the transfer portal, and they nearly got Keelan Russell last year. Nearly. And Alabama's a way better program than SMU with probably more resources. Also, SMU nearly got Chris Del Conte from Texas, or at least they tried to. Nearly got, I'll take that back, but they tried to. And to try to pull that off, to even offer him the amount that they reportedly did, rumored that they did, is crazy. So those are just some brief updates I wanted to provide before we got started. And as always, make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, make sure to hit the notification bell. All those things, just do them. And I appreciate you. Thank you, Moody Meatball. Go Washington to you. He's a Husky fan, so go Huskies. Thank you for being a moderator in this server. CJ is a Georgia Tech fan, can tell by the logo. So it's funny we're talking about Georgia Tech, and we got a Georgia Tech fan in here. This is a nice audience. Hopefully we can really grow it as the show goes on. Because, again, today I didn't just do massive in big letters. I didn't even do that to mock Buckeye Scoop, who should be mocked. I did that because in truth it is a big show. This is going to be 2 hours long. We're going to go until 5, probably at the minimum, maybe a little bit after 5. So it is in truth a massive, massive show. But let's kick it off here. I'm excited. I'm nervous, but let's just kick it off. So the Michigan Wolverines, we're going to do a record prediction for them and then a few teams following them about, again, 10 minutes each. I want to give you my record prediction for Michigan entering 2025. The Wolverines in 2024 went 8-5. It was a failure of a season that was only partially redeemed by wins over Ohio State and Alabama to end the year, and a near upset over Indiana, but 8-5, 5-4 in Big Ten play, tied for 7th in the Big Ten. They won the ReliaQuest Bowl. They won the Ohio State and Alabama game by a combined 9 points, and they lost to Indiana by 5 points. So in those 3 big games they had, not counting Northwestern, they won by about an average of 1 point per game. Close wins, close losses, and then a blowout loss to Oregon and a blowout loss to Texas. That was Michigan in 2024. And with Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Josiah Stewart, Will Johnson, even though he didn't play for much of the year, and Colston Loveland leaving, you really begin to wonder what Michigan's going to be in 2025 to a certain degree. Well, I will tell you what they're going to be in 2025. I think that Michigan is still going to be a strong defensive team. I think that their talent roster is still closer to the top of the Big Ten than at the bottom. I think their defensive line will regress, but at the same time, it won't regress by as much as people think. They've recruited well there. Even more so, they've developed well there. I think Michigan's best position coach, Lou Esposito, is on the defensive line, and he has some assistants helping him out there. And I think Wink Martindale, kind of a prove-it year for whether he's going to be elite or not, and whether last year's late season improvements were a mirage or legitimate. But I think right now he's certainly a top 15 defensive coordinator, top 20 at the worst, top 10 at the best, could prove himself to be in that top 5 conversation at the end of the year. I lean positive for the Wolverines at quarterback. running back, the interior of the O-line, though tackle is a worry, the defensive front, and special teams. I think that tackle, especially wide receiver, and their staff are either negative in general or negative in terms of what Michigan should be fielding at those positions. I love Bryce Underwood this year. I think that Underwood is going to be a really good quarterback at the end of the year. Doesn't mean he won't start off a little slow. He's a true freshman, and the tackle situation isn't perfect. But I like him. I'm going to list players that are on my all Big Ten team. Got Justice Haynes and even Jordan Marshall at running back there. Greg Crippen at center. My all Big Ten teams, for context, are massive, so there will be a lot more players per each team just in general. Not that one team is disproportionately dominating them. Giovanni El-Hadi and Nathan Afabi at guard. I have Andrew Sprague at tackle on one of my lower teams in the Big Ten. Donovan McCulley's the only wide receiver, but he's on one of the lower teams, and you should have better than that if you're Michigan. Outside of him, there's a lot of questions at wide receiver. I have Marlon Klein at tight end. I have Rayshon Benny, Trey Pierce, Damon Payne Jr., Ike Owuna, and Trey Williams at defensive tackle. Michigan's defensive tackle room is still loaded, just doesn't have the same upside. I have Derek Moore, TJ Guy, and Cameron Brandt at edge for my all Big Ten teams. Ernest Hausman, Jimmy Rolder, and Jayshawn Barham. TJ Metcalf, Brandon Hillman, and Rod Moore, asterisk with Rod Moore if he's healthy. If not, then he's not on here. And then Yair Hill as the only corner. There's some questions at corner for Michigan opposite of Hill, but I think Hill's pretty good. I look at this schedule for Michigan. Plus 210 to reach the playoffs, over-under win total of 9.5. Juice to the under for now, and their odds to win the Big Ten are plus 1,100. New Mexico's their opener in week 1. They need that because traveling at Oklahoma in week 2 is going to be a headache. Oklahoma's defense is loaded. Offense has some potential. I think Michigan and Oklahoma, to a certain degree, are the Spider-Man meme at this point, but Oklahoma has a staff with a better history entering season 4 to Michigan entering season 2, and they have a more experienced QB, and it's a night game at home. Week 3, Michigan plays Central Michigan at home. They travel to Nebraska in week 4. For weeks 3 and 4, Sharon Moore will be suspended by Michigan, and I'm expecting additional suspensions to be added probably for week 1 and week 2 for Michigan. So I imagine for much of September, Sharon Moore won't be on the sidelines. Week 5, they get a bye. Wisconsin, they host week 6. They play at USC week 7. They host Washington week 8. Travel to Michigan State week 9. Host Purdue in week 10. They get a bye week 11. They play Northwestern week 12, travel to Maryland week 13, and Northwestern is a neutral site at Wrigley Field. Then they end the year week 14 hosting the Ohio State Buckeyes. Looking at that schedule, I think to myself there's a whole lot of opportunity there. A huge opportunity for Michigan to go 12-0. And for Michigan to go 6-6, and Sharon Moore gets fired, and the whole program falls apart. It ends in a blowout loss with Ohio State, and kind of begins the season with losses to Oklahoma, and for the conference season against Nebraska with several losses in between. They could go 12-0. They could go 6-6. I think that realistically, it's anywhere between 7-5 and 11-1. I could see 6-6 or 12-0, but only if almost everything, if not everything, goes right or wrong for the team. It's the easiest schedule in the Big Ten. If you factor in Oklahoma, I don't know if it's the easiest overall schedule for Big Ten teams, but only looking at Big Ten teams and then only looking at those Big Ten teams' Big Ten conference schedules, it's the easiest. Their toughest games are at Oklahoma, at USC, and Ohio State. And one of those is out of conference. The other's at home against a team that Michigan has a mental and matchup advantage against. They return 65% of their production, which is 24th, and are 10th in preseason SP+, with a 21.5 power rating, meaning Bill Connolly views them as about 21.5 points better than the average college football team in his S&P Plus ratings. I am picking Michigan to go 10-2 regular season, factoring all of this in. I am kind of going with chalk when it comes to Bill Connolly's rankings for Michigan, viewing the returning production, Michigan's recent history, more so as it relates to the fact they still have a lot of older players who are on Jim Harbaugh's rosters, and that Bryce Underwood should be a really good quarterback based on his high school profile, and the fact that, honestly, he enters a overall better supporting cast than I think Lagway did last year, or than Raiola did with Nebraska last year. Maybe not much better, but I think slightly better. And I think that can make a difference, especially with a schedule that's much easier than Florida's was last year, and maybe a tad bit easier than Nebraska's, depending on how the schedule pans out. 10-2, 8-1 in conference, the win over Ohio State that I think is likely to happen, will send Michigan to Indianapolis, where they will lose to a Big Ten championship caliber team, national championship caliber team in Penn State. There'll be a CFP participant. I don't think that this Michigan team is built to go beyond the first round. Maybe they could, but even if Michigan does go undefeated, I don't see them escaping the quarterfinals. They will play a team in Texas or in Penn State who is built to do everything that Michigan does and more, and do it better in every way. I made a Twitter post about this the other day. Penn State's better than Michigan at literally every position, and they are very willing and able to play the same style of football. It's practically the same thing with Texas. And as for other teams, not to the same degree as those two, but Michigan would have to face one of those two eventually, and it's not like the Ohio State game's a given. I think it's a likely win, but it is far from a given because Ohio State's going to be better than Michigan. So tied for second in the Big Ten with a few other teams is what I think Michigan will finish as. 10-2, 8-1. It'll be one of those records where a team that is not top 2 in power ratings goes to the championship game because they get the schedule draw that's good. That'll be Michigan. They will get in Indy over other teams that I think are better than them, hit a wall against Penn State, and probably hit a wall in the playoffs. But this team, roster-wise, should be top 15, and if the coaching staff performs better than it did overall last year, it should be a top 10 team. Looking at just some overall predictions for Michigan I want to share with you. I think that Michigan, prediction number 1, this is mild. We're going from a mild to hellfire scale, kind of like a Scoville scale. Got a mild prediction, a medium prediction, a hot prediction, a scorching prediction, and a hellfire one. The mild prediction is that Michigan is a better quality team in 2025 than 2024. I kind of think that's almost redundant. Unless a lot goes wrong for Michigan, and by a lot, I mean a lot, that will be the case because quarterback was just a disaster. The O-line profiles is better this year than last year. Receiver can't get worse than it was last year. And I think secondary and linebacker, based on returning production, will get better. But D-line will get worse. There are parts of Michigan that will get worse. Tight end will get way worse. But overall, they should be better. Medium prediction is that Michigan goes over its preseason win total and makes the college football playoff. It's a medium prediction because they're at plus odds to go to the playoffs and plus odds to go over their win total, but they only need one more win than the Vegas guesstimate, and a very educated guesstimate, that Michigan's going to go 9-3. A 10-2 Michigan's a lock for the college football playoffs. So that's a medium one. A hot prediction is that Michigan's wide receiver core is worse than Penn State's was last year against Notre Dame. That is essentially me putting my chips on the table and saying Michigan's wide receiver room won't get better at all. I think the only way it does is if development comes into play, and I haven't seen that a lot with Michigan's receivers in recent memory, or I think if Andrew Marsh breaks out as a freshman, then I would be proven wrong there. The scorching prediction is that Sherrone Moore coaches Michigan to the Big Ten title game with 8 Big Ten wins. That is scorching. And the reason it's scorching is because I feel like Michigan is really, as Vegas would say, kind of that 9-3, 7-2 Big Ten team. You know, you probably lose to Oklahoma, given how early it is, and then between USC, Ohio State, Michigan State, Nebraska, you probably drop 2 of those games. But I look at this schedule, and outside of Oklahoma, USC, and Ohio State, no one on here is going to be better than Michigan. Doesn't mean they can't beat Michigan, but Michigan's going to be significantly better than every team on here when you factor in home field advantage than everyone except Ohio State, USC, and Oklahoma. And they get Ohio State at home, and Oklahoma and USC are not top 10 power rated teams. At least they probably won't be at the time Michigan plays them. So I think Michigan takes advantage of the schedule a little bit. And then prediction number 5, which is a hellfire one. I personally don't think it's quite this high, but the odds of this happening are pretty low. So I listed as a hellfire one. I think Bryce Underwood is a top 10 level quarterback by the final game of Michigan season. So whether that's Ohio State and they get, the postseason ban everyone's talking about, that's the final game. He'll be a top 10 level QB then. Whether that is the playoff game, like when Michigan exits the field, he will be a top 10 level quarterback. Not for the entire season, not for that, but in an individual game performance or maybe a final series of games, he will be a top 10 level quarterback exiting 2025 and entering 2026. So, Michigan, I think they're going to go 10-3 regular season, including championship week, 8-1 in conference, tied for second in the Big Ten. They'll be the Big Ten runner-ups. And with 3 losses, I would intuitively say they're going to get a road game in the first round of the college football playoff. Probably lose that, but I haven't gotten that far yet. The college football playoff predictions will be released soon, so make sure to stay tuned on that front. Now let's talk about Nebraska. So the Nebraska Cornhuskers went 7-6, 3-6 in Big Ten Conference play, and it looked like everything was going to collapse and they were going to go 5-7 again at one point. But Rule rallied the troops. He demoted Marcus Satterfield, brought in Dana Holgorsen, and now Nebraska has some momentum entering 2025. And the team that won the Pinstripe Bowl, that found a way to beat Wisconsin for the first time in over a decade, I'm going to give you a record prediction for them today. Nebraska, as a team, I think, is building towards something good, towards something great. And I think you saw that in 2024 at times where they were able to win some close games. In the Wisconsin game, they were able to, even with Wisconsin having some success on offense, they were able to wake up on offense and make that game so far away from Wisconsin's grasp that you didn't have to worry about a choke job. And then against Boston College, they found a way to end the year off on a positive note for really the first time since 2000 and, oh my gosh, it's even before 16 because 16 ended very badly. At least this team ended the year off with a bowl win. And that, I think, is the message we should be preaching with Nebraska football, is the message of positivity. There's a lot more to be positive about with this team than negative. Yes, they were 12th in the Big Ten last year. They finished with the same conference record they had in 2023. But they made a bowl game. They broke through that glass ceiling, and they return a 5-star quarterback. They built up their team in the portal, and they've recruited at about the same level Scott Frost did, I think, with better development. So there's a lot going right for Nebraska. I love the quarterback position for them with Dana Holgorsen. I love that duo. I have Dylan Raiola on my all-Big Ten team for sure. I also have Emmett Johnson there at running back. I like the running back room for Nebraska, especially running back 1 Johnson. I have Rocco Spindler, Henry Lutovsky, and Justin Evans-Jenkins on my all-Big Ten teams on the interior of the offensive line. And then you travel down to wide receiver. Wide receiver, Dane Key, Ja'Cory Barney Jr., and Neziah Hunter. That is a 3-headed monster and one of the nation's best receiver groups. I like Luke Lindenmeyer to break out at tight end. I look at linebacker. I like Vincent Shavers Jr., Dasan McCullough, Marquise Watson-Trent. I also like Andrew Marshall and Sear Wright as a cornerback duo, especially Sear Wright, who actually have, hint, as an All-American caliber player. Not that we're talking about All-Americans here. That will be a different video. That will be for the deep dives. Hit the notification bell again to make sure you get notified when those deep dives release, because then I'll be talking about Nebraska and every other team I discuss. They're All-Americans, not just telling you who I have for their all-conference teams like in these record prediction videos. I lean negative, though, on the D-line. I don't have any Nebraska player on my All-Big Ten defensive line, and I have huge All-Big Ten teams. So I think that room, while not terrible, is certainly not up to the Nebraska standard, not up to a Big Ten standard. And I have concerns overall at DB. I like corner, but I do have questions outside of right because Marshall's an incoming transfer, and safety I think has some concerns there for sure. But the schedule's once again advantageous. Rules in year 3, and I think this is the best staff he's ever had at Nebraska. They're plus 610 to reach the playoffs, plus 3,800 to win the Big Ten, win total 7.5. They open up against Cincinnati in week 1. That's a trap game. Just telling you right now, it's a trap game. I think Cincinnati in the trenches matches up very well with Nebraska. Doesn't mean I think Nebraska's the inferior team. They're favored by 7. I agree with that, but trap game. That's a must-win. Week 2, they host Akron. Week 3, they host Houston Christian. Week 4, they host Michigan. They get Michigan without their head coach on the sidelines. That's kind of a prove-it game. Week 5, they get a bye, and off the bye, they play Michigan State at home in Week 6. Got Maryland on the road Week 7. Back-to-back road games at Minnesota Week 8. Host Northwestern Week 9. Week 10, they host USC. Play at UCLA Week 11. They get a bye Week 12 before traveling to Penn State Week 13. You're not winning that game. And then Week 14 against Iowa, who Nebraska's not beat Iowa at home in over 10 years. So this is going to be a pretty big schedule, pretty big season for Nebraska. Lots of opportunities for taking advantage of your situation, for breaking through, but also opportunities to yet again fall short. So looking at the schedule and the team, I like where Nebraska's at. This is the 14th toughest Big Ten conference schedule. Their toughest games are Michigan and USC at home, Penn State on the road. If I had to shout out the next toughest by matchup, it's probably Iowa at home. So they get a lot of their tougher games at home. And this is a team that is capable of reaching the playoffs. So a lot plays to Nebraska's advantage for sure. When I look at the Cornhuskers, this is a team that I think is about 8-4, maybe 9-3, maybe 7-5. That's kind of how I view it, if I'm being honest. Let me give you some predictions for Nebraska before I reveal their total record prediction here. So, again, this is the mild to hellfire scale. It's kind of like a Scoville scale. So we have a mild take, a medium take, a hot take, a scorching take, and a hellfire one. So for Nebraska, I think the mild take is that they have their first winning record in Big Ten Conference play since 2016. I think this team is probably going 5-4, maybe 6-3 in Big Ten Conference play. I don't think they're going to go worse than that. They could, but I'm not picking that to happen. The medium take is that Dana Holgorsen and Dylan Raiola will lead a top 25 offense, averaging points per game and efficiency. So points per play or ESPN's efficiency metric. I don't necessarily care a ton for yards per game, because if you're a super dominant team and your defense forces a bunch of turnovers and different things, you're not always going to have a super dominant yards per game offense in terms of surface level. Obviously, if you get in a shootout, then you have to be, but on a yards per game basis, there are offenses that have been top 5 in efficiency that aren't even top 25 in yards per game. Another prediction for Dylan Raiola, this is more of a hot take, is I think he will pass for 3,500 yards or more, and he'll double his passing touchdown total from last year. Last year he had 13. This year I think he'll have 26 or more. I then look at the scorching prediction, and I look at Nebraska's defense, and I think to myself, they lost Nash Hutmacher, they lost Ty Robinson, they lost Princewell Unman-Malin, they lost some other players too whose names escape me, some guys who are going to be cut or should have been cut due to the roster limitations, but some of that's being delayed. They actually opened up a transfer portal. The NCAA did approved a waiver to enter the portal or something like that. Anyway, they also lost some, like I mentioned, key contributors. James Williams, that name just popped in my head. And there were some more, too, that were poised to be in the two-deeper start. When you lose that much, not just to the draft, but to the portal, and you have not recruited at an awesome level, and you were inconsistent there last year, not dominant, that is something to be concerned with. So I think that, plus what they bring back at DB, and having a DC in John Butler, where he's a defensive coordinator for only his second year in college football in his career as a football coach, and they lose a lot, and the DBs they return may not necessarily be good production. I think this could be Nebraska's worst defense in Matt Rule's tenure by a mile. And I think it will be his worst, more likely than not by a good margin. Nebraska's essentially on defense what Ohio State is. You're making a coordinator change where you'll keep some similar schematics, but you're still going to have the differences in play calling. You are also wildly changing parts of your two-deep and certainly most of your starters. The difference is Ohio State's recruited and developed better on defense, and Patricia has way more experience and pedigree than John Butler, and Ohio State's Caleb Downs. You have Malcolm Hartzog, or maybe Malcolm Hartzog's gone. Maybe that was a brain fart by me. But you have safeties that when I look at Nebraska's defensive back room, I don't have a bunch of confidence in them. I don't. Oh no, Malcolm Hartzog's still on the team. Marquise Buford Jr., Deshaun Singleton, Mario Buford. I like Sear Wright at corner, though. But corner and linebacker, those positions aren't enough to cover your whole defense. The hottest take, the Hellfire one, prediction number 5, is that the Cornhuskers will lose 3 games at home this regular season. 3 games at home. So your home games are, we're not going to do the non-conference because Akron and HC were automatic wins. Michigan State, Michigan, Northwestern, USC, and Iowa. So 3 out of those 5 will be losses. And that's a pretty bold pick and certainly a hellfire hot take in my mind, because in order for Nebraska to have a winning conference record, you can only lose 4 conference games. And since I think all the losses at home are going to come from in conference, that means at most Nebraska will lose 1 conference game, but then on the road, that being, but then lose 3 at home, which is interesting, but let me explain this here. I think Nebraska's going 8-4, 5-4. They're going to be tied for 7th in the Big Ten, and they're going to go to a bowl game. That's what I'm looking at with Nebraska right here. So they're going to be a probably top 25 caliber team in my mind. They will go to a nicer bowl game than last year, probably win the bowl game, because Nebraska still hasn't been there in so long that they'll be motivated. I think Rule's a good culture, will prevent opt-outs like he did last season. However, I look at some of the matchups Nebraska has against Michigan, for example. You have the coaching edge in that game because Moore is suspended, and I think Rule's a better coach than Moore anyway. But Michigan is a pretty big roster edge, I think, in the trenches and on defense. So Nebraska, I think, would have to have a really good game on offense, and Michigan may have enough figured out on offense by then to where Nebraska may have to have they may have to play at an A or A plus level and rely on Michigan to play it barely above average or worse than that, which is possible, but still, it's a tough game. I think Michigan State in Week 6 is a trap game. I think it's the definition of a trap game. Nebraska will probably be favored by a touchdown or double digits, when in reality these rosters are pretty close together, especially at this point in the season when injuries haven't completely destroyed either. You look at, Minnesota. That's a game that could be a loss, could be a win, but it won't be easy. USC right now is in a better spot than Nebraska is. Luckily, Nebraska gets them at home, but it's not an automatic win. I think Penn State's the only auto loss on the schedule, but that combined with Iowa, who's had Nebraska's number, and the other teams I mentioned, means Nebraska's probably not going 11-1 or 10-2 yet. I don't think they're going to win double-digit games like they traditionally do under Matt Rule in his 3rd year, because the era's different. Rule's had to make some staff and roster adjustments that I don't think he anticipated. I still think regardless of all of that, though, they are going to get better. I mean, 8 wins for Nebraska, even if there's a bowl loss in there. 8 wins, potentially 9 if you get to a bowl game and win it. Not if you go to a bowl game, when you get to the bowl game and if you win it. That would be absolutely massive for Nebraska. If they go 9-4 with that schedule, they may not finish ranked in the top 25, but they'd receive votes. I would expect them to be top 25 in power ratings this year. And depending on who they beat in the bowl or who they beat in the regular season, they could finish ranked for the first time at the end of the year since 2014, 2013. I am certainly on the come up with Matt Rule. I think that they're in a good place moving forward. That's absolutely for sure. Up next, we have Ohio State, talking about the Ohio State Buckeyes 2025 record prediction. The reigning national champions in the Ohio State Buckeyes went 14-2 last year, 7-2, 4th in conference play. But they made the playoffs, they overcame their adversity, and they won it all. And now they enter 2025 as probably the preseason number 1 or number 2 team. Got a target on their back, but that's every year under Ryan Day in Ohio State. So looking at how they performed in 2024 and what they lose entering this year, what changes? Well, Chip Kelly's gone, replaced with Brian Hartline. Jim Knowles is gone, replaced with Matt Patricia. Only 3 starters return on defense: Caleb Downs, Davison Igbinosun, and Sonny Styles. And on offense, only a few starters for the whole year, because the offensive line kept rotating. They had some guys who started in the playoffs at the end of the year, but guys who've had full season starting experience that are coming back. You have Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate. You have technically incoming transfer Max Clare, but I didn't count Bo Atkinson on defense. So it's just a side note. I think he'll be an All-American this year. And then you have Tegra Shabola. And did Carson? Yeah, I think, Carson Hinsman, because Carson Hinsman came in after the tragic injury to Josh Simmons, who I think will ball out in the NFL. So really only 4 or 5 returning starters on offense as well. This is a team that traditionally has reloaded, traditionally I say, because in the new portal era, it's much harder to do that. We saw that with Georgia last season, where they went 11-3 and almost lost 3 games or even 4 games in the regular season. Ohio State has minus 310 odds to reach the college football playoff. Minus 310 odds. Are you... That just is a testament to the faith that you should have in Ryan Day and the program that he has. See, last season, I lean positive with Ohio State at quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, the skill positions, and then the defensive backfield. I don't think linebacker and safety are going to drop off a lot, as some might expect. The Buckeyes have a lot of players on my All Big Ten team in the preseason, which that'll be released soon in a video format. I have Julian Sayin at quarterback, James Peoples and Bo Jackson at running back. CJ Donaldson would have made it, but I think that the Big Ten stacked there and Peoples and Jackson as the year goes on are going to get better. I have Luke Montgomery and Ethan Onenwa representing guard and tackle on the teams. Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, Brandon Innes, and Mylan Graham there. I might add in Quincy Porter Jr. It's just, even though not all of them are going to play a whole lot, they're among the best of the best there. Max Clare and Will Kazmarek at tight end. Caden McDonald and Edric Houston at D tackle. Kenyatta Jackson Jr. and Bo Atkinson at edge. And keep in mind, these teams are massive. I have more players per individual team and more teams in general for my all-conference teams. So it may come across like some teams are overrepresented in these videos. They're not. My teams are just that much larger. Arvell Reese and Sonny Styles at linebacker. Caleb Downs and Jalen McClain at safety. And then Jermaine Matthews Jr. and Devin Sanchez at corner. A bold prediction I have that I won't go over much because it's more of like an individual roster switch that I think could happen, is I think Devin Sanchez by the end of the year will be better than Davison Igbinosun, because Sanchez is a freak, and Igbinosun, while I think he has a lot of NFL traits, I wonder. He could be an All-American. He could also be someone they have to bench. So that's something to keep in mind. I think that the offensive line for Ohio State's a tad bit overvalued. By some, it's way overvalued. But in the national sense, I think it's a little bit overvalued. Good unit. Probably not great, though, in my estimation. You look at how they handled the college football playoff last year, and the moments where they were the weakest were the O-line. Against Notre Dame in the second half, against Texas for the entire game, and against Oregon and even Tennessee, the O-line wasn't the reason they were winning those games at all. It just wasn't. The fact that Ohio State has freak wide receivers, had a gamer at quarterback, and then Oregon and Tennessee thought they could line up man-to-man with shorter corners who would never face those receivers, that was the reason they owned both of those teams. Do not tell me they owned those teams because they had to protect Will Howard for 6 seconds in the pocket or 5, or they had to run for 200 yards before the fourth quarter was over. Don't do that. Regardless of all those things, they're so talented, and in their weak positions, they're good. So this team can go 12-0. And the absolute worst outcome with a billion injuries is probably, I would say, 8-4, but I don't even think that's realistic. I'm just including it just in case injuries happen, and then it happens, and it's like, Well, yeah, in the new era, if Georgia last year could go 8-4, and honestly, if everything went wrong for them in terms of close games, could have gone 7-5 in some universe, then Ohio State can maybe go 8-4 if everything goes wrong for them. I think 9-3 though is that realistic floor, and with their schedule, Texas is who you open up with week 1. Tough outing, but it's at home, and that's a really good thing. Week 2 they host Grambling State. Week 3 they host Ohio. They're favored to win the Big Ten with plus 195 odds, and their over-under win total's 10.5 preseason. They travel to Washington week 5, host Minnesota week 6, travel to Illinois and to Wisconsin in back-to-back road games in week 7 and 8, get a bye week 9 before hosting Penn State week 10, playing at Purdue week 11, hosting UCLA week 12, Rutgers in week 13, and then they travel to Michigan in week 14. The 15th toughest Big Ten conference schedule. It's much tougher than that once you factor in Texas, because Texas is the hardest non-conference game by a mile any Big Ten team has to play. They bring back 48% of their production. They're ranked in S&P Plus by Bill Connolly, a 29.5 in the preseason, which is first. My Ohio State prediction here is kind of a bold one. I say kind of because I think in the new era of college football, it's harder for everyone to reload. I genuinely believe that. And then I also think that this schedule, it's easier than some may think, but I also think it's harder than some may think. I think that Ohio State is going to go either 10-2 or 9-3. And I'm siding with 9-3. Honestly, the tiebreaker for picking Ohio State to go 9-3 and barely miss the playoffs is the Michigan game. I think that when you look at how this team is built, I think that they are gettable in a way that previous Ryan Day teams, besides the 2021 team, weren't, in terms of a team like Illinois or Wisconsin or Washington can play them close and maybe pull off an upset. And I think Texas and Penn State roster-wise are bad matchups for them. I think that they can do enough through the air, especially on defense, but on offense, and then enough on the ground on both sides of the ball too, to where I think they can game control Ohio State a little bit. And then for Michigan, Ohio State should beat Michigan this year. They should. They're better, but they were better as an overall national championship caliber team in 2021. They were probably that same thing in 2022, and they were infinitely better last year. And Ohio State loses more on the D-line, and they haven't recruited as well as Michigan on the O-line. They haven't, and they don't have as much experience at running back either. And their quarterback isn't going to be as mobile. Like, everything that points to how Michigan has won the game in previous years is heightened compared to last year. So what indication that Ohio State is going to win that game or even earn a guaranteed win? Smith promised to win, but players do that all the time, so I don't fault him for that. What tells you that Ohio State should win here confidently? I'm not confident Michigan's going to win either. I'm not. The reason I think Ohio State's more likely to lose there than win is because I've seen Michigan do this over and over and over again in the game. And they prioritized getting D-tackle transfers and D-line transfers, even though they didn't lose as much there as Ohio State did. And they've developed better there than Ohio State did. So the formula for winning the game favors Michigan now more than it did in 24 and 23. Not nearly as much as it did in 22 and 21. And for anyone who's going to clip this and say I'm calling Ohio State soft, that's not what I'm doing. I'm not even calling Michigan tough either. I'm just saying on the road with Ohio State, if they even have one loss, the pressure will be back on Day, because that's how the job at Ohio State is. What has changed? That's my question. This team almost lost 4 games last year. They had 2 close wins over a bad Nebraska team and a Penn State team that played with its food against Ohio State. The loss to Oregon was not really bad at all. Long trip on the road. Oregon played an A-plus game there, stole a possession. Don't really fault Day for that. And then they had the Michigan loss. And then in the playoffs, they had 2 dominant wins, but the win over Texas wasn't dominant. It was a double-digit win because of a defensive touchdown and a busted play. And then against Notre Dame, they almost had a dominant win. But again, a little bit of inconsistency there. They were Ohio State was much closer to 23 Michigan than they were to 20 Alabama or 19 LSU. And 23 Michigan didn't lose 2 games. So I think that they're due for a bit of a step back, Ohio State is. I think that 2026 is a year for this team to really explode and have another year like I think they did in 2024. Because Day runs, I think, the best culture in college football, or certainly something close to it. So when people look at this and they're saying, oh, you're picking Ohio State to lose 3 games, it's very bold. That's my hellfire take. It's one of the hottest takes I have for this year, is that Ohio State misses the playoffs due to losing 3 regular season games. A lot of that has more to do with Day's problem with Michigan, and especially with Penn State and Texas and who I think they are rather than who I think Ohio State is. I think Ohio State will certainly be a top 10 team, if not top 5. In fact, I would say definitely top 5. I'd probably peg them 5th off the top of my head. And then you look at it, and if they hosted Alabama week 1 and then hosted Oregon week 10 instead of Texas and Penn State respectively, I'd pick them to go 11-1, and they'd get a home playoff game. I might even pick them to go 12-0 because I feel like the more wins Ohio State enters in the Michigan game with, there's probably less pressure on Day, and that probably helps a little bit. But this team last year was not close to invincible. They weren't. They weren't 20 Alabama or 19 LSU, or certainly not 0-1 Miami. And they lose a bunch, and they change coordinators, and the meta of the game currently is game control. It's chewing clock, and Ohio State can do that. I mean, Washington did it in 23 with a run game that was questionable and awesome receivers, but that takes a lot to do, especially with a younger quarterback. So I think this team's going to be good, and if they reach the playoffs, they're certainly winning a first-round game. But 9-3 is what I peg them with. I think that my mild prediction for them is they'll have the best receiver group in America, wide receiver plus tight end. That's easy. I think that's a guarantee. Medium is many parts of this team that are expected to improve or reload won't match expectations. But the contrast to that, and I think it's a hotter take, is that linebacker and safety won't drop off at all as a collective unit. Safety will drop off a bit because I think that Hancock and Ransom were studs. But Downs will probably improve a little bit. I think Guerreri's a really good coach, and a linebacker definitely will improve. It's the same depth, if not much deeper. I just don't know much about their third string or second string. And with Patricia wanting to run sets with 2 or 1 more linebacker than Knowles did, that's something that we're going to see very early, I think. But I think Arvell Reese is going to be much better than Cody Simon, and I think he'll be better even than Sonny Styles. My scorchin' take is that this will be the best wide receiver core in Buckeye history this year. Now, that's scorchin' because you had the 2021 group that was just amazing, and all of them got picked in the first round. So even though you have Jeremiah Smith, I don't know quite yet if Innis and Graham are going to be high-level first-rounders, and Tate is projected to be, but it's not a guarantee. Nothing's a guarantee. So we'll just have to see how that goes. And again, I already told you my hellfire pick. Ohio State can certainly prove me wrong. I don't even think necessarily that I am doubting them, if I'm being honest. Maybe I am, but I've said before, and I'll say it again, with schedules that have multiple big games, and Ohio State has 3 of them, if you think Illinois is going to be really good, then they probably have 4. With big game schedules, 9-3 is the new 10-2. It just is. And in the 16-team playoff era, well, I'd be picking Ohio State to make the college football playoff. And power ratings-wise, they'll be a top 5, top 10 caliber team. I just think there are certain things that align this year that will cause them to lose 3 games. They'll definitely win their bowl game, I think. And then they'll come back in 2026 with a storm. All right. I'm loving this so far. I am absolutely loving this. We'll talk about Oregon now. Let's see if there are... Holy moly, what was the $50 super chat? Holy cow. Holy moly, $50 super chat. I have to interrupt the show for that one. Holy cow. That's like, you know how huge that is? I've only gotten, I think, maybe 3 or 2 $50 super chats. And I think 2 of them before this came from one guy. not named Blue Wolverine. I'm sorry that I didn't catch it earlier, Blue Wolverine. I was just so focused on everything, but I'm going to shout you out here, and we'll get right back to it after this. I'll shout you out for a minute. And I'll also give you a Go Blue. I have no problem. Everyone probably knows this at this point, that I'm a Michigan fan. Did the Super Chat disappear? Yeah, the Super Chat disappeared, so I can't pull it up. Sorry for missing that. I can't pull it up live here, but I can shout you out, and I can go all the way up and like it. Boom. Go Blue, Blue Wolverine. Thank you for checking in throughout the show, and thank you for the $50 Super Chat. I really appreciate that. Like, thank you. Thank you so much. That is absolutely incredible. We have a lot more of this show to get through, and it's going to be an absolute blast. So thank you for the $50 Super Chat. And then there's just so many people in the comments that I don't think I can answer any non-Super Chat questions at this point. But keep on watching, guys, because Oregon's up next, and then we have Penn State, we have USC. I actually had a take about Penn State that I'll briefly touch on here before we get to Oregon. There are people who think that because Penn State has James Franklin, that such a fact means that Michigan would have beaten Penn State last year. That is crazy. That's insane. And then entering this year, when Penn State returns as much as Michigan does production-wise, with much higher quality coming back, and with, Jim Knowles is better than Wink Martindale. I think it's very evident. Kotelnicki is way better than Chip Lindsey. It just, the fact that people got mad at me on Twitter for saying that Penn State would beat Michigan handily. I said they would destroy Michigan, but I think Penn State's also the best team in the country, and I don't think Michigan is. And usually the number 1 team in America will destroy the number 8 team in America. So I don't think that's much of an insult to Michigan. I mean, I'm picking Michigan to go to Indy. Like, don't, and I hate doing it, but I'm doing it because there's a path for it, and I think their schedule matches up for it well. But Penn State would absolutely beat them. And maybe I'll be wrong, but we probably won't figure that out this year. So just a quick side note on Penn State and Michigan. Oregon recruiting's also been on fire. So if you're a Duck fan in here, congratulations to you for sticking it out. I mean, Oregon recruiting was never dead. They'd lost momentum for sure and got a lot of commits stolen away. I don't get, though, why people thought that, recruiting's finally dead. I think that was more of a projection on the part that people find Oregon recruiting annoying because they don't have a good in-state talent base. So therefore, you don't expect Oregon to recruit well, and when they do recruit well, it means they're taking away from other programs that do recruit well and typically have large fan bases. So Oregon is annoying in particular to like Georgia, Alabama, Texas, Ohio State. I mean, they took Brycen Moore out of Texas's backyard. They took Trey McNutt and Naeem Offord from Ohio State. Those were players that many said should have went to Ohio State. And they have been pillaging California for years. So that annoys USC. So I think that whole thing was more of a projection than anything else. But I could be wrong. Oregon right now they finally have a top 15 caliber recruiting class. But let's talk about Oregon and my predictions for them. I've said this before. It bugs me beyond belief that people are selling Oregon at a rapid rate or no one's talking about Oregon. It's eerie, if I'm being honest. Oregon went 13-1. Have you all forgotten that the Ducks, I know that most of you haven't, but have you forgotten that Oregon and Dan Lanning were the only team to enter the playoffs with an undefeated record? They were the only team to finish the year in the Power Four with 1 loss. The only. Everyone else finished with 2. Even the national champion Ohio State finished with 2. They gave Oregon their 1 loss, and it was a spanking. But while Oregon's regular season win didn't quite make up for it, they at least beat them. That was an incredible coaching job that Oregon did. This team, in hindsight, was probably 10-2, maybe even 9-3 caliber, and the schedule just worked out for them, and then their staff took advantage of it. So Oregon being 13-1 and 9-0 last year, first in the Big Ten, they won the Big Ten, beat Penn State. I don't get where the lack of excitement is for Oregon's future. I genuinely don't understand it. I genuinely don't. I mean, we just talked about Ohio State here, pulling up the Buckeyes. We just talked about them. I don't get where the lack of excitement is coming from. I don't get it whatsoever. I straight up don't. They lose a lot of players from 2024 entering 2025. They do. But Oregon is in this position where they're upgrading their talent roster. They're going from a team that relies mostly on the portal and high school as well, sort of 50-50, but leaning on the portal for starters, to now they're supplementing in the portal for starters and really leaning on their development and high school recruiting. And I lean positive for them in a variety of areas. Why? Because it's Dan Lanning, it's Oregon, it's Will Stein, it's all of their assistants who'd be assistants, high caliber assistants at almost any other school. This is a good team, and a team that's going to be top 5 this coming year in terms of roster talent. I mean, looking at my all Big Ten teams, which are huge, so most teams, if not all teams, are going to have more players on my all Big Ten teams than anyone else's. But I have Dante Moore. I have Mackay Hughes, who I think will be an All-American running back. I have on the O-line Iapani Lololu at center, Emmanuel Pregnon at guard, and the transfers Isaiah World and Alex Harkey at tackle. I got Justice Lowe, Gary Bryant Jr., and then Decorian Moore at wide receiver. We're going to talk about Decorian Moore here in a few minutes. I got Jamari Johnson and Kenyon Sadiq at tight end. This D-line, you got Aiden Breland, who I love to break out, and Amari Washington, who's been this steady backup for Oregon. And at edge, Tatum Tuioti and Mateo Uyunglele could be the best edge duo in America. Betcher comes back at linebacker. I think Devin Jackson's ready to step up. I love Dylan Thieneman. He's on my all Big Ten team. Same with incoming transfer Theron Johnson. And I like true freshmen Trey McNutt and Naeem Offord to contribute a bit too. Oregon is the youngest team out of the current teams in the top six in terms of roster talent. So you have Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, the traditional big 3. Clemson, I still think, is there with how much they bring back. And then you have Oregon and Texas, who are the recent recruiting risers. Both are probably ahead of Clemson, and at this point, Clemson's probably that 6th team in terms of talent, but we'll just include Clemson there because they're pretty close. Oregon brought in the best class in the nation last year in terms of average rank per recruit. So they brought in the highest quality class by a mile. And while I'm concerned a little bit with DB, they have a lot of upside there. And I think that their schedule is one with a lot of opportunity and challenges. So they could go 12-0 again. I also think, though, they could go 8-4. And unlike Ohio State or unlike Georgia, I think them going 8-4 is actually realistic. It's not a scenario that would take them having a bunch of players injured. It's a scenario that would take a lot of their road games out to the plains or out to the Midwest or out to the East Coast, just leveling up, and Oregon missing on some either transfers or development pieces. In week 1, they get Montana State. Week 2, they have Oklahoma State. Week 3, they travel to Northwestern. They play rival Oregon State in week 4. Penn State in week 5. That's a big, big game, and I'm not going to peg it as an auto loss, but Oregon, while in their spirit, they should expect to win that game. If you're objective, I know my brain is telling me Penn State, Penn State, Penn State, Penn State. I mean, in my mind, the line could be 9.5, and I'd be picking Penn State to cover right now. Just it's the whiteout. It's a long trip. Penn State will be more experienced, and it's the final week of September. So Oregon won't quite be gelled. They'll have some gelling going on and some experience, but Penn State's still going to have this massive experience edge and staff continuity, and they're going to be the same as Oregon or better in almost every way, honestly. So that's a game where if Oregon wins, I mean, it furthers my belief that Lanning's an elite coach. But that's a game also where I think a loss is likely. They get a bye week 6, host Indiana week 7. That's a trap game. At Rutgers week 8, also a trap game. Wisconsin week 9, bye week in 10. Week 11, they travel to Iowa. That's not going to be easy in November. 12-13, they have back-to-back home games against Minnesota and USC. In Week 14, they travel to rival Washington, who currently has not lost a home game since, I believe it's either 2022 or 2021. That's how long it's been since they have lost a home game for the Washington Huskies, Oregon's chief rival. The Ducks have the 9th toughest Big Ten conference schedule, only counting conference games. It's a little easier than that, probably, when you factor in the non-conference against Montana State, Oregon State, and Oklahoma State. They only bring back 43% of their production, and in preseason SP+, they're given a 24.7 power rating by Bill Connolly, which is 7th. Oregon, I think, is going to go 10-2, 7-2. They'll be tied for 5th in the Big Ten. I like him as a CFP participant that probably gets a home game for a reason that I will talk about in a minute when I move on to more specific predictions. But this is a team that I think is going to mess up at least once. The Penn State game, they will be underdogs. I think Penn State may have their best game of the regular season, or at least a performance that's in their top 4th of performances. The whiteout, it being at home, and Oregon probably won't play their best game because it's all the way in Pennsylvania, out in the middle of nowhere, a lot of travel time. There'll have to be some drive time as well, and it will just be challenging. But outside of that, I think when you look at, Indiana at home or Rutgers on the road, Iowa on the road, Washington on the road, and even USC at home, one of those games, there is a chance that they'll mess up and they'll just lose. Remember, last year, Maryland was within like 11 or 10 points last year in November. They nearly lost to Wisconsin when Wisconsin was hanging on by a thread, when Wisconsin was nearly dismembered and their limbs are hanging on by like one tendon because they're so banged up. And they've played an uber tough schedule, and they almost beat Oregon. And in part of my mind, they should have beaten Oregon. Remember Indianapolis? Oregon surrendered 300 rushing yards and still won. That usually doesn't happen. If Will Howard ran a second earlier and therefore they were able to get the timeout, or if Jeremiah Smith doesn't make a freshman mistake and shoves his DB a little bit too much, they lose to OSU. I mean, Oregon almost lost 3 games last year. They won a bunch of close games, and then it all came back to bite them in the Rose Bowl. And with how much they're losing, and the fact that I think Lupoy is a bit of a negative on the staff for an entire side of the ball as the D coordinator, there's a chance that this team can lose 3 games. There's a world where they lose 4. Not picking that to happen, but I think 10-2 is the most likely outcome in all of this. I really do believe that. I think that Indiana, at Rutgers, at Iowa, USC, at Washington, one of those 5 games, I think all those are trap games. I mean, Minnesota could even be a trap game because they're sandwiched in between 2 trap games. There's a lot of spots in here for Oregon to play uncomfortably close with their opponent. I think they're going to mess up in one of those. And then Penn State on the road, not an auto loss, but I think a likely loss at this point. Moving into some of my specific predictions for Oregon. This is a mild one here. The O-line will reload and be top 10. I think that's pretty easy when you return your center, and more importantly than that, the center was good. Iapani Lololu was one of the best centers in America, didn't allow a sack last year. And then you add the 2 tackles, Harkey and World, who I think are going to pan out, and then Emmanuel Pregnon was awesome at USC. That hurt to see him go from USC. That, and then you have some depth on the offensive line behind them, gives me confidence that I think this will be a top 10 unit in 2025, like it was in 2024. A medium take for you all. The Ducks will have multiple freshmen play on defense at a high level, whether redshirt freshmen or true freshmen. If it was only true freshmen, I would label this as the hot take on the Scoville scale, not just the medium one. And we still have our scorching Hellfire picks to go through. I think that Aiden Breland will get significant playing time. I think that Naeem Offord and Trey McNutt will. There's a chance that others will as well. I think they're projected starting corner right now. Name escapes me, but I think he's a redshirt freshman. This is a super young team, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And then a hot take, prediction number 3, is that Oregon loses at least 1 game to a lesser team. And that is a hot prediction because Oregon has not lost to a team that was obviously inferior to them since 2022, Lanning's first year. I'm essentially picking Oregon to not just lose a game to an inferior opponent, I'm picking Lanning to regress in terms of power ratings for probably the second year in a row, because I think 23 Oregon beats 24 Oregon. I think 24 Oregon probably beats 25 Oregon, at least at the beginning of the year. At the end of the year, I don't know, because Oregon's leveled up and scaled up so much in terms of talent that I think you're going to see a ceiling from Oregon that you haven't seen since 2023, or maybe ever have seen. The scorching take I have is that Oregon will lose to Penn State by 17 or more points, but they will beat USC by more than 17 as well. That's really bold. The reasoning for this is I think Penn State can do everything Oregon does, but better, with the exception of wide receiver 1, who I think will be Brycen Moore, and Oregon's DN depth. But I think Oregon has better staffers at almost every position except for wide receivers coach, head coach, and I'd have to look into it a bit more, but off the top of my head, I think that, Lanning's better than Franklin, but Franklin's assistants are better than Lanning's assistants. It's on the road. Penn State has an experience edge that really compensates for Oregon having a higher blue chip ratio and more 5 stars. And I think right now Penn State's one of the best developmental programs in the country. I can't quite say that for Oregon. I think they are, but not quite Penn State level, if I'm being honest. The reason they'll turn around and destroy USC is also the juxtaposition between what I think Oregon will be at the beginning of the year in September and the end of the year in November. I think that Oregon and Ohio State are similar in this way. They will start off with days looking like 2023 Bama did at the beginning of the year, where you think, holy cow, someone's going to get fired. And then you think as the year goes on, they're figuring things out. And then at times at the end of the year, this team can win it all. They should win it all. I'm actually going to place a $1,000 bet that this team will win it all. The difference is Oregon, I don't think, has a problem with their rival, and they have to play just Penn State. They don't have to play Penn State and Texas. So even though I think Ohio State will be better than Oregon, Oregon's schedule overall, while it has some more landmines than Ohio State does, you don't have the same big number of big games either, in my mind. So they'll beat USC in a big way, but I also think they'll lose to Penn State in a big way. And with that being said, 10-2, 7-2, getting a home game in the college football playoff because they beat a USC team that I'm high on by that much. I don't think they'll win it all, but I do think they'll escape the first round with that home win and get at least 11 wins. My hellfire take, get ready for this. Brycen Moore will have 1,000+ receiving yards and be better than Ryan Williams. That's my hellfire take for Oregon. Brycen Moore is going to be their Walmart version of Jeremiah Smith. And I say Walmart with all due respect because no one is Jeremiah Smith. The fact that there's even that comparison being made by me is a high honor to Brycen Moore. I think that Moore is going to be ridiculously good this year. The high school tape shows it. People I've talked to who I trust in the recruiting world, or just analysts who I don't know personally, but who I read and listen to, everyone's high on this guy. They're talking about him like he's as close to Jeremiah Smith as you can reasonably get. So I think he's going to have a big year and help lead Oregon to their second straight college football playoff appearance. Now we got to talk about Penn State. Isn't this fun? We just hit 4 p.m. as well, so we've been live for about hour, 10 minutes or so. A lot more to get into, so much more to get into. Make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, make sure to hit the notification bell. Thank you very much. I'm going to do this record prediction segment on Penn State a little differently than I've done my previous ones. I am going to tell you straight up that Penn State is going to win the national championship. And I'm going to tell you why through the lens of 2024. Penn State finished 13-3, 8-1, tied for second in the Big Ten. And they lost all of their big games, except for, I would classify SMU as a big game. Not the top 5 win you need to win it all, but it was a win of top 15, top 10 caliber. And they dominated SMU, so that was a good win. But they lost all their top 5 games, like usual. Choked to Notre Dame, should have dominated them, but choked, and that's a credit to Freeman for, I think, having the better game and in that moment the better culture. They lost to Oregon because their defense couldn't stop Molasses and Winter. And they lost to Ohio State because they were like a baby playing with food, and they didn't give Tyler Warren the ball inside the 5. And meanwhile, Ohio State, I think in that game, schemed up both sides of the ball like they did in the playoffs. They just did it against Penn State much earlier before the playoffs even began. They lost in the semifinals to Notre Dame. It was a season that was bittersweet. You won 13 games. You almost beat Oregon, the number 1 team. You played in Indy, and you went 11-1. First season ever in which James Franklin won 11 regular season games and more than 11 games overall. Won 12, earned the 13th in the Fiesta Bowl against Boise State. But it was bitter in the sense that you lost to 3 teams in Ohio State, Oregon, and Notre Dame who maybe under a different head coach, or if you re-simmed the games, Penn State wins maybe 1 or 2 of them. Or if they have 2023 Iowa-level luck in close games, who Penn State beat 31-0, maybe they win all 3 of them, and then they win it all last year. But that didn't happen. That's not reality here. So let me wake you up from reality, but also tell you what I think reality will ultimately be in 2025. Penn State is the best team in America. It's either them or Clemson to start off the year. As the year evolves, I can see a world where maybe Texas, maybe Ohio State, maybe Georgia get better than them. But those are maybes. And I think some of those scenarios require a lot of things going wrong for Penn State and a lot of things going right for those other programs. So I don't think it's likely. I lean positive everywhere. The one statistic where I lean negative with Penn State, the one, is that in Franklin's career since 2014, they have 3 wins versus the FPI top 10. One of them came during the regular season. Or maybe 2. You got Ohio State in 16. I forget if Wisconsin in 16 was top 10 in FPI or not. And then in 17, they beat Washington in the postseason, top 10 FPI team. In 2022, they beat Utah in the postseason, top 10 FPI team. That's where I lean negative, is James Franklin, this guy, this man, who is regarded by me as a top 20, top 15 head coach, by many others as a top 10 head coach. He cannot, for the life of him, punch above his weight class. I don't get it. But the good news with Penn State is that this year, no one may be above them in weight class. When you factor in development and experience, of course, they're not the most talented roster by high school recruiting rankings, but that's just a piece of the pie. They might be the best team overall in America. And if they are, then given Franklin's track record against the lesser teams, his game management may not have to improve and they still win it all. I have Drew Aller as the best overall quarterback in the Big Ten. Singleton is the best overall running back in the Big Ten. I also have Katron Allen on my All-Big Ten team at running back. Nick Dawkins is on my All-Big Ten team. Vega Ione at guard is on my All-Big Ten team, is the best guard in the Big Ten. And I also have Cooper Cousins and Jevin Williams mentioned. I have Nolan Rucci, Anthony Dunco, and Drew Shelton on my All-Big Ten team at tackle. They got Kyron Hudson in the portal, Devontae Ross and Trevor Pena. I have all of them from the portal on my All-Big Ten teams. Khalil Dinkins and Luke Reynolds also represented there. I have Zane Durant as the best D tackle in the Big Ten. And in addition to him, I have Xavier Gillum, Ty Blanding, Alonzo Ford Jr., and Caleb Artis on my All-Big Ten teams. I trust a lot of Penn State staff, so that's why I think some of these unknown players are going to take steps forward, especially with Kotelnicki being in his second year. And I think that Jim Knowles in year 1 is a massive upgrade over Tom Allen. Tom Allen's a good DC. Just think Knowles is the best. Denai Dennis Sutton and Zariah Fisher are mentioned at edge on my All-Big Ten team. Same with Tony Roas, Dominic DeLuca, Keon Wiley, and Amari Campbell at linebacker. I love Zakee Wheatley and DeJohn Lane at safety. I have A.J. Harris as the best corner in the Big Ten, and Elliott Washington, nickelback, don't know why I said that, nickelback Zion Tracy mentioned, and backup corner Davion Collins mentioned. And Penn State has some special teamers mentioned, too, on my All-Big Ten team. I'm positive everywhere on this team in regards to roster. The question's Franklin. And also, how much do other programs that have more recruiting talent, how do they do? What goes right for them? Because if everything goes right for Texas, they have a higher ceiling than Penn State, and now Penn State has to punch above their weight class. If everything goes right for Ohio State, it's the same thing. To a lesser degree for Georgia, Alabama, and Oregon. I think this team at worst is going 10-2. I think they could lose Drew Aller and potentially go 10-2 still. Now, if they lose him, they're not beating Ohio State, and they're probably not beating Oregon, because from Aller to the backup, who I believe is Ethan Grunkemeyer, that's a huge drop-off, but maybe I'm underestimating him. But this team's floor, the Nittany Lions have the highest floor in America, and they have one of the highest ceilings in America, I think, when you introduce realism. If you don't introduce realism, there are probably 5 teams that have a higher floor than Penn State. Maybe 6, maybe even more than that. You introduced realism, though. You accept the reality that they return 65% of their production, and their preseason SP Plus rating is a 27.7, and they're top 5 in preseason FPI, even with a talent deficit. Realism tells you they probably have a top 3, top 2 realistic ceiling in football. Maybe it's number 1. They are minus 250 to reach the playoffs, and I honestly think it should be higher than that, and they're plus 230 to win the Big Ten, only behind Ohio State. They also have an easy non-conference schedule. They open up week 1 against Nevada. Week 2, they host FIU. Week 3, they host Villanova. They get a bye in week 4 before hosting Oregon in week 5 for the whiteout. Finally playing a big-time opponent in the whiteout. That's helpful to Penn State. They travel to UCLA in week 6, host Northwestern week 7, play at Iowa week 8. They get a bye in week 9 before traveling to Ohio State in week 10, hosting Indiana week 11. That's a trap game. Michigan State on the road week 12 could be a trap game, but I think Penn State's much better than Michigan State roster-wise and most positions staff-wise. They host Nebraska week 13, and then they finish off the year against Rutgers in week 14. I love Penn State in this spot. I love how they match up with their schedule. I love what they bring back. I love their developmental track record. I love the upgrades they made at coaching. I'm telling you, Knowles is the best of the best, and there's a world where it takes a little bit longer to implement his defense than Penn State wants, and yes, that could happen. But to those who say it will take 3 years for him to implement his defense, you have to understand that Day in 2021 was basically Lincoln Riley, and he was running almost an Alex Grinch-level bad defense. Knowles inherited that. In the year following, it was a top 25 unit immediately. The year after that, so 2 years after he inherits the unit, the only defense that's better than it is a generational 2023 Michigan defense led by now NFL DC Jesse Minter, and a developmental staff that was one of the best I've ever seen on that side of the ball. And then in 2024, well, number 1 defense in America. Absolutely number 1. And that's an honor because Texas's defense was pretty damn good in 2024. So that guy's a wizard. Kotelnicki is a wizard. The only DC who's prevented Kotelnicki from scoring a touchdown in his defense is Jim Knowles. And Jim Knowles has played against Kotelnicki not just once in the Big 12, but also once last year, and he owned him. So now 2 of the best minds, Knowles being much better than Kotelnicki, but still Kotelnicki is one of the best OCs, they get to collaborate. And that's going to mean a lot, especially when you have staffers under them that Penn State has retained and given raises. And Penn State also went out in the portal and they got Trevor Pena and they paid him over $1 million. And they paid Aller and Singleton and Allen and Denied and Sutton and others to make their return. This team's gearing up for a huge, massive national championship season. It's what Penn State's gearing up for right now. My prediction for them is 13-0 regular season. So that's a bold pick. No team's favored to go undefeated. Even in the older era, where it was easier to build super teams and schedules were easier because you didn't have super conferences. Penn State, I think, is going undefeated regular season. They're going to be first in the Big Ten. They'll be the Big Ten champion. They're going to match up with Michigan, who's my bold pick to reach Indy. Not because I think Michigan's the second best team in the Big Ten. I think they're 5th or even 6th there, but the schedule lines up for them. And I think they're going to, look, they're going to get to Indy. And people are going to think if Michigan goes there, or really if anyone except for maybe Ohio State or Oregon reaches Indy, they're going to think, oh, well, it's James Franklin in a big game. And then, bomb. and Penn State will beat whoever that team is by 20-plus points. This is a really dangerous team with a floor that is higher than 2024 Ohio State, with a floor that is higher than 2022 Georgia. Don't know if the floor is higher than 21 Georgia or 23 Michigan, but its ceiling's higher than 23 Michigan as well. It just is. They have better receivers, a quarterback who's viewed as a better NFL prospect than Aller. Knowles is better than Minter. Kotelnicki's better than Sharon Moore. And Penn State's also recruited a little bit better than that Michigan team did. So absolute ceiling, yes, this Penn State team is a higher absolute ceiling than 2023 Michigan does. That's insane. And maybe I am too high on Penn State, but I'm not a Penn State fan, and you all know me as a pretty objective guy. Doesn't mean I get things right. I get a lot wrong, also get a lot right. This Penn State team reminds me of the past Ohio State and the past Michigan teams. It does. Ever since 2023, Ohio State and Michigan have fielded national championship caliber. Actually, going back since 2022 and excluding 2024 from Michigan, because that team was never going to win it all, even if McCarthy and Harbaugh came back. Ohio State and Michigan have fielded national championship teams more often than not. This Penn State team fits the mold and fits the build that they did. Now we'll get into some of my additional predictions for Penn State here, and this ties in with what I was saying. My prediction that I think is mild, and that I think many others think is mild, is that with Jim Knowles, Penn State will field the top 3 defense in college football. I reserved it from top 2 and from number 1 because Texas right now preseason should be the favorite to have the number 1 defense. Alabama brings back a lot. Georgia recruits and develops well in defense. They've had a few down years there, so regressing to the mean says Georgia's defense should be better than it was last year. Ohio State's super talented. After all, Knowles built that unit up, and I think Patricia's going to be good. Michigan returns a lot, and Martindale seemingly figured some stuff out last year. So Penn State's defense probably is not guaranteed to be number 1, but I think top 3 for sure they'll field the top 3 defense. In terms of a medium pick, going up in terms of hotness on the Scoville scale, Drew Aller goes round 1, pick 1 in the 2026 NFL Draft. This means he has a good year. This means he progresses as a player. This means he doesn't get hurt. And it means that he is able to run Kotelnicki's offense to perfection. It's medium. There's some boldness to it, but there's already mock drafts predicting him to go round 1, pick 1. So I don't think it's super bold. Going up on the boldness scale, I have a hot prediction. Penn State's wide receiver core will be their best since the 2021 season when they had Jahad Dotson. It'll be better than 2022 and better than 23 and 24 by a mile. Just look at Trevor Penny nearly getting 1,000 yards at Syracuse, Devontae Ross getting 1,000 with Troy. Hudson got 300 yards and made some awesome catches behind Jacoby Lane and behind Mekhi Lemon, who are top 25 receivers at USC. My scorchin' pick, prediction number 4. The Nittany Lions will field the best line of scrimmage play in the nation. The number 1 overall O-line, factoring in both depth and only looking at their starters. And this is the prediction that really makes it scorching, because Penn State having the number 1 O-line is a mild. That's a mild prediction for Penn State to just have the number 1 O-line. That same thing with Notre Dame. If you want to say Notre Dame is the number 1 O-line, that's not even bold at all. Like Joe Rudolph is elite, could be coaching in the NFL there, and would deserve it. My prediction that makes this bold is I think they'll have the number 1 starting D-line. It's not number 1 in terms of depth. Georgia is deeper there. Michigan might be deeper there. I'm confident Clemson's deeper there. Oklahoma might. There are teams that are deeper than Penn State in the D-line, and a handful of them. But I think starting D-line-wise, Penn State, it's either Penn State or Clemson for the best starting caliber D-line, in my personal opinion. There are other contenders too, like Texas or Georgia, but I view Penn State as the best starting D-line. My hellfire prediction, this is bold, one of my bolder predictions of the year, is that Penn State will be viewed at the end of the year as the best national champion since 2021 Georgia, and the best since 2020 Alabama in terms of strength of record. This team will be better than every team since 2022. That's why I'm picking them to go undefeated, by the way, because I think this will once again be a down year in football. This will be like last season, and it will be like 2021, where at the end of the year, you had a super dominant team emerge. Ohio State, in truth, only emerged at the end of the year, but in the playoffs, it was clear. Yeah, this is a tier and a team of its own, and if they played that way the whole season, they would be viewed historically in a probably better manner. Georgia in 2021, they had that blowout loss to Bama, but that Alabama team was another team in 2021, one of probably three that could have realistically won it all, and Bama was definitely top two. And you had Saban, and you had Bryce Young, so I get why they beat that Georgia team, but they showed in the playoffs, number one. I think Penn State overall is going to be like that 2021 Georgia team, where they are going to own people left and right, and even if they don't have the best coach in the country, and Smart's way better than Franklin, not making that comparison. I'm using that as an analogy to say, even if Ryan Day or Dan Lanning are on the other sidelines, they can do something, and they can try, but they will fail. And Penn State, because of their roster, their experience, senior leadership, and then their coordinators and assistants, they're going to come through, and they're going to win, and they're going to win big. So that is my Hellfire prediction right there. This team at the end of the year, in my mind, will be viewed as the best national champion in several years. And people will be talking about them in terms of an achievement, postseason run and regular season record-wise, in the same light as other prior undefeated teams who played tough schedules. So a lot of like the SEC undefeated champions, for example. I am that high on Penn State. I am. And I think that they are a blend of 24 Michigan and 23 Ohio State, or 20, I mixed them up, my apologies. They're a blend of 24 Ohio State and 23 Michigan. And they also, to be fair, blend the best aspects of 23 Ohio State and 24 Michigan. They do. Like 24 Michigan had a better D-line, I think, than 23 Michigan did in terms of starters. And 23 Ohio State had better corners and a better O-line at the end of the year than 24 Ohio State did. They blend the best aspects of the past few Michigan teams and don't take many of their weaknesses. They don't have the weakness Ohio State did last year of some shaky corners and a thin O-line. They do not have the weakness that 23 Michigan did, where they don't have a alien receiver. They don't have that. So that is my Penn State prediction for 2025. Love it, hate it. Let me know what you think. Whew. That was that was the most fun I've had this entire show, was talking about Penn State. I imagine, I don't know what people thought about that. Seems like people liked it, but doesn't always matter what people like. You know, I'm pretty young, so I can't give much life advice. But just because a few people, or at times the majority, doesn't like what you have to say or doesn't like you, that doesn't mean they're right. It doesn't. I mean, you can look up countless historical examples or even less serious examples to understand that point. Like, majority opinion is useful to look at, but a lot of the times it's not useful to follow. There's a lot of times I go against the grain. There's a lot of times I also go with the grain. You know, it's up to you to make your own decisions and wisely assess what you can. And with Penn State, when I look at it, I get excited, and I think, guys, I know they don't have the same track record as the Michigan and Ohio State teams that came before their champions did at winning big games, but my goodness, they should have a higher floor than those teams. They just should. They don't have the same weaknesses. Now, to be fair, I don't think Penn State has two, top 20 caliber first round picks at D tackle, and I don't think they have anyone close to Jeremiah Smith or Caleb Downs in their respective positions, but even in general. So they also don't have as good of players at specific positions, but roster-wise, I think they have a higher floor, and I think their staff is decently better than Ohio State's last year in terms of assistants, and it's modestly better than Michigan's in 23. Head coach is worse than both, though. So there's a lot of fascination. Like, this team could be another Penn State team. It could also be, for the first time in forever, I could say, better than the prior champions that came from Michigan and that came from Ohio State. Let's talk about USC now, shall we? The USC Trojans have regressed year over year over year under Lincoln Riley. But Vegas and myself and many others think that this time of suffering for USC, and believe me, last year was a time of suffering and mourning and gnashing of teeth, we believe it's probably going to at least get better. I'm not going to go as far to say yet, this early in the segment, that it will come to an end, but it sounds like things are going to get better. They lost 6 close games last year. All of their losses, all of them were close. And most of their wins were impactful, were big. They had some close wins. For example, UCLA, close win. Nebraska, close win. A&M, close win. LSU, close win. But they also had 2 blowout wins over Wisconsin and over Utah State. So in the net averages, they were more unlucky than lucky in their close games. And to start off with this is a statistic that I didn't know until a few weeks, or I forget if maybe it's a few months ago. Lincoln Riley, in his career, wins, just making sure everyone's listening here, Lincoln Riley wins 70% of his close games in his career. Was a wizard in 2022 at USC for winning close games. Won some close games in 2023 when the defense was the worst in USC history. Was a wizard at winning close games with Oklahoma. He is going to have his best defense of his career outside of maybe the 2020 Oklahoma defense or maybe the 2017 Oklahoma defense. And unlike those Grinch defenses or those Oklahoma defenses, his unit will get better as the year goes on because of DeAnton Lynn. And Lincoln Riley last year also had his worst offense of his coaching career. So regression to the mean plus DeAnton Lynn and his track record says that things should get better for USC. And their preseason win total of 7.5 also says that in the regular season they should at least win 1 or 2 more games than they did last year. And that's with them only returning, 50% of their production and being rated outside the top 25 in preseason S&P+. I am so high on this team. So high on this team. They have a low floor, for sure. But I don't think their floor is as low as some believe. And their ceiling is infinitely higher than people think. This is a Lincoln Riley team with a roster that fulfills the blue chip ratio. That plus a high-level defensive staff and defensive coordinator and a quarterback that had some playing time and that Riley can further mentor and tutor for another preseason, that's huge. And their schedule, plus 570 to reach the college football playoff. My friend Bald Father Bets gave this out as a best bet for a parlay. And I don't do betting. I don't even give betting advice, but he wins money. If you follow what he does to a T, you will actually win money. So that's the only reason. I said that before. If I ever do betting, it will be because I know I can beat the books. And Bald Father Bets runs a good show. He can beat the books. We both agree that USC reaching the playoff is something that is more likely than plus 570 odds. And winning the Big Ten at plus 2,400, well, that's not nearly as good, I think, as the playoff odds, because I don't think USC has a Ohio State, Oregon, or Penn State level roster. If they get there and they have the right game, the right opponent, you can like that. And you can always hedge, too. If you bet them to win the Big Ten and they get to Indy, you're going to win money if you then, withdraw your money from that bet, or if you cash out. That's the proper term. But their schedule, I love it because, look, they get Missouri State at home week 1. Easy opener. Georgia Southern, Clay Helton versus USC. It's going to be an interesting game, but if USC's competent, that should be a pretty easy win in week 2. They get Purdue on the road week 3, but Purdue is transfer-ridden and they have a new staff. They get Michigan State at home week 4, Illinois on the road week 5. By Illinois on the road in week 5, we should have an idea of what USC is and who they are. They have a nice series of warm-up games that will tell us how good of a team they are, that can provide challenges but shouldn't provide more than maybe a loss. Week 6, they get a bye. They host Michigan. Michigan a few games into their October, early November stretch. They get Michigan off a bye at home. They then travel to Notre Dame on the road week 8. They get a bye week 9 before playing at Nebraska week 10, hosting Northwestern and Iowa in back-to-back games in week 11 and 12. They play at Oregon week 13, host UCLA week 14. That is a very manageable schedule. I mean, think about last year. They had to play in Las Vegas to open up the year, away from home. They got Utah State, then a bye. Then in week 4, they traveled to Michigan, came back to host Wisconsin, then traveled to Minnesota. Then at some point they traveled to Maryland. At some point they, I think, traveled then again to Washington, who's on their same time zone, but several states north. They had a ton of travel miles. This year, at Purdue, nowhere near the distance of traveling to Maryland, not even the distance of traveling to Michigan. Same with Illinois, same with Notre Dame, same with Nebraska. And Oregon is not the same distance as traveling to Washington. So the extreme travel is spaced out a little bit better, and the miles won't accumulate at the same rate. So that, plus Lynn and Henderson and Doug Belk being in year 2 and Rob Ryan being added to the staff, and a new strength and conditioning coach who, even though he was added after winter workouts, is going to be there for, summer and fall workouts. So they'll, I think, immediately get some benefit there, because I do not think Benny Wiley was good at all. Don't think so. Did his best, respects to him, but was just not a fit. That's why Lincoln Riley moved on from him, even though he worked with them for a long, long time. I am optimistic with USC at most positions outside of offensive tackle, defensive tackle, and tight end. Looking at their roster, I have Jaden Mayava at quarterback on my All-Big Ten team, Waymon Jordan, Eli Sanders, and Brian Jackson at running back. It's one of the deeper running back rooms in the Big Ten. Those are on my All-American, All-Big Ten, not All-American. Do not take that. I do not have 3 USC running backs on my All-American team. I don't. Just a simple slip up there. I have John Ray Reed, incoming transfer from Syracuse, as an All-Big Ten player at center. I have DJ Wingfield as a All-Big Ten guard, and Elijah Page as an All-Big Ten tackle. I have Makai Lemon as the best wide receiver in the Big Ten, not named Jeremiah Smith or Carnell Tate. And I also have Jacoby Lane and Prince Strachan on my All-Big Ten teams. Larger teams than most, but that's because we're in the era of super conferences. I think most conferences need to add a 4th team, and then the honorable mention after that to get more good players represented for accolades, because it's not like we're doing participation trophies. My All-Big Ten teams have a quantity of 6 teams and typically 1 additional spot for every roster position, and I'm still not naming, for most teams, anywhere close to their starting roster. So you're not doing participation trophies by expanding that, you're just honoring more players, and I think that's deserved, especially as there are more teams in fewer conferences, which means the selectivity for all conference teams is even higher. I have Devin Tompkins on my All-Big Ten team at D-tackle, Cameron Fountain and Anthony Lucas at edge there. I have Eric Gentry as my best overall linebacker in the Big Ten. I have Kamari Ramsey and Bishop Fitzgerald on my All-Big Ten teams at safety, and then DJ Harvey at corner for USC. Getting into my prediction for USC, I have them going 11-1, 8-1 in Big Ten play. Tied for second in the Big Ten. They're tied with Michigan and one other team who I will get to when I do another live show and, clip up these segments here. And I have USC getting a home playoff game. I think their toughest game is going to be Oregon, and I think it's going to be their toughest game by a mile. Notre Dame and Michigan would be their next toughest, but I think that Oregon's kind of in a similar situation to USC. USC is the better DC. They have the better play caller, too, on offense with Riley versus Stein, but Oregon has better assistants. Oregon's more talented. Oregon is on the same track record in terms of starting position that USC was, but Lanning inherited a better situation and didn't make the same mistakes that Riley did and has done a better job. So Oregon's ahead of the curve by probably 2 years, if not 3, compared to USC, if I'm being honest. And they get them at home. Oregon does. They just do. And Oregon, I think, also has an extra game of rest. So that's big. And Oregon is also going to be better than USC at almost every position. It's kind of like the my new favorite analogy for like a bad matchup is the 2021 Georgia versus Michigan matchup, where Georgia was just better than Michigan at everything and they were more athletic. That's kind of what Oregon is over USC, with the exception of probably DB and starting number 1 overall linebacker, which I like USC more there and I like their DC more. But Oregon's deeper. Oregon is ahead of the curve compared to USC. It's just not a good game. But it's winnable. It's not a guaranteed loss. And I like USC against Michigan and Notre Dame. I will tell you that much. I love them in those spots. I think that USC nearly beating Notre Dame last year, despite Notre Dame winning 14 games and running for 1,000,000 yards against USC. What if USC can stop the run? What if they can play defense for 4 quarters? And Notre Dame no longer has a rushing quarterback. They have a pro-style quarterback. And USC probably will get better overall at DB compared to where they were last year. I think it's a good matchup for the Trojans, even though it's on the road. And they have a rest advantage over Notre Dame. They also have a rest edge over Michigan, and they get Michigan at home, traveling several time zones over, and I think Riley's a better coach than Sharon Moore. So I love this USC schedule, and I like the team too. I love the schedule more because I don't think this is a top 10 team. They'll be overranked, overrated in terms of final college football playoff ranking when this ends. They will be, but they're certainly a top 20, top 15 team that I think can win a lot of close games for sure. Some predictions for USC. A mild one is that Riley will have a winning record in one-score games this year, which, if my memory serves me correctly, he has had a positive record or a 500 record in close games every year of his career except for last year. A medium prediction. We're going up in Scoville scale. Prediction 1 is mild, then we got a medium prediction, a hot prediction, a scorching prediction, a hellfire prediction. Medium is that Jaden Maiava will be a top 25 overall quarterback, leading a top 10 to 15 offense. I think that regression to the mean says that this USC offense will be certainly top 20, top 15, and last year it was probably top 30, top 35 caliber. It was truly the worst in Riley's career. A hot prediction that I have is that Eric Gentry will be the best linebacker in the Big Ten. It's not a hot take, but it is a prediction with certainly some boldness and some kick to it. I'm saying that Gentry will be better than Tony Roas, better than Sonny Styles, better than Arvell Reese, better than Bryce Betcher, better than Aiden Fisher, who was an honorable mention All-American for Indiana last year at linebacker. A scorching prediction is that D'Anton Lynn fields a top 15-20 defense, and honestly, it could be better than that. It's scorching not because I think it's unlikely, but because the public perception could not process this. It's similar with Penn State winning the Natty, which I think will happen, PSA. Or if USC, let's say 3 years from now, USC, in my mind and in others' minds who do a lot of research, it could be a preseason number 1 team. The public would say no, and the public would plug their nose, and the public would just reject that immediately because they can't process it. They can't see it happening because it hasn't happened in a long time or hasn't been done before. And the public's like that. That is USC in defense. They did not have good defenses under Helton for the most part. They have had awful defenses so far under Lincoln Riley. They're going to be top 15 or top 20 this year. And it's not necessarily because they have a top 15 defensive roster. I don't think they quite have that yet, but it's a much better defensive roster than what they had last year, and Lynn's a top 5 defensive coordinator. So they're going to punch above their weight class in a major way defensively. And last, but certainly not least, this is the boldest prediction, is that USC will go from 6-6 to 11-1, and they will host a playoff game, which means implicitly I'm almost predicting them to win 12 games because most teams will win their home playoff game. Most will. I'm not exactly certain who I think they're hosting yet, but I have some ideas, and I think that USC would beat most of the teams who they would host in this hypothetical scenario that I am painting and predicting for you. I believe in Lincoln Riley, and I believe in USC with all the hires they've made. The recruiting makes me believe too, because talent does produce results if you have competent coaching, and USC has that. But more than the recruiting, if USC was just recruiting at a top 15, top 10 level, I would believe in them. Maybe not as much long-term in terms of being a national title contender, which I think they will eventually be, but I'd believe in them as a Big Ten contender, playoff contender, maybe dark horse title contender in the next few years, just based off their recent coaching hires. This is going to be a well-coached team. They're going to do a lot better in close games, and they're going to play sound defense, and they're going to play wicked offense as per usual under Lincoln Riley. Whew! We are done. We got six in-depth team predictions. And you know what's funny about all this is if you guys think that these team predictions and record segments were in-depth, they provided some sound analysis, and just gave you an insight of my thoughts and the schedules and the returning production, so on and so forth, I cannot wait. I cannot wait to give you my deep dives, which probably will start to come out at the earliest in the next week, latest 2 or 3 weeks, where I will give you individual position grades, coaching grades for each position coach, and I'm going to give like game specific win-loss predictions, because I gave hints at what were going to be wins and losses, games that I thought were going to be tough, but I didn't give official game-by-game win-loss predictions. I'll be doing those in the deep dives, and I'll also be telling you who I think they're going to meet up with in the postseason. Like bowl opponents, college football playoff opponents, how far they'll go in the college football playoffs. I can't wait to get in those deep dives. And I'm going to give you stats from the players the prior year, the two deep. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be essentially like a preview magazine miniature for one team. Those videos are going to be definitely 30 minutes or more longer. So I'm so excited. So excited to do those. Now we have a few more videos to get to, and then we will be out of here. I should have brought up a glass of water. Maybe after I get through this. Then I can, take a break, get a glass of water. But we have so many viewers here. I don't want to stop. I absolutely don't want to stop here. Again, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Also click that notification bell so that you can get notified when we go live Sundays, Mondays, and Wednesdays, and other times as well. Mostly at 6 p.m., but occasionally we'll change up the time. Occasionally we'll go live on other days too. I want to discuss now Kirby Smart. Kirby Smart is the best head coach in America. Let me say that again for you. Kirby Smart is the best head coach in America, and I don't even know if it's particularly close, if I'm really thinking it through and really picking my brain and my memories and the film. And honestly, what Kirby Smart did last year impressed me a whole lot. It was similar to what Ohio State did under Ryan Day, if I'm being honest with you, where the way that they won in spite of the adversity they faced was admirable. Now, Day won the playoff. He won 3 more games than Kirby, lost 1 fewer. But he also didn't face the same schedule, and teams have up and down cycles. Ohio State has essentially been trending up on average every year since 2021. Georgia's been trending up every year on average since 2019. 2019 was the low point for Georgia. 21 was the low point for Ohio State. They've been trending up since then. And at some point, you do have to come back down to earth in either a major way, because that just happens with everyone. Even Saban lost 3 games in 2010, went 9-3. Kirby hasn't even done that since his first year, which is crazy if you think about it. They may have played the toughest schedule in college football history last year, and they almost came back and beat Alabama. They beat Florida by double digits despite Carson Beck being a moron and throwing 3 picks. And they beat Texas by double digits. Double freaking digits in Austin, with Beck turning it over, I think, like 4 times or so. He threw 3 picks. Anywhere from 3 to 4 turnovers, I think, is what Georgia had in that game. Beat him 30-15. And if not for the refs reversing a call, it may have been 30-7 or 30-8. It was insane. And then he beats him again in the SEC title game, and then they were physically beating Notre Dame with a bunch of injuries and a backup QB. It's just Notre Dame won the special teams battle, and then what made Notre Dame win by double digits on top of the special teams was the fact that the refs missed a false start on Notre Dame, called it instead an offsides and encroachment on Georgia. That helped kind of end the game sooner. But when Notre Dame recovered that fumble and threw the touchdown and then had the kickoff return, I mean, that was kind of game over with how Notre Dame and Georgia played last year in the states that they were in. They finished 11-3, 6-2, second in the SEC, and then they won the league, second in the regular season. And Smart has a 105-19 record in his career. Just crazy stuff, if I'm being honest. And then I observe Georgia, and I think to myself, entering this year, why should people view them as anything but a top 5 team, or at least top 6? Why would they be outside the top 10? That's a question I'd love to ask Josh Pate. Why does he have them outside the top 10 entering the year? Why? So much went wrong for Georgia last year, and they bring back their entire staff. I think they finally hit in the portal, finally, at wide receiver. They returned some portal guys from last year, like Colby Young, for example, that due to a variety of reasons couldn't play. And they were just so banged up on O-line, and Beck had this unexpected drop-off to where so much went wrong for Georgia. Almost everything went wrong for Georgia. And they went 10-2 in the toughest league with the toughest schedule in the league. 10-2. And they beat Texas twice. They kicked Texas's rear in a way that no one else was capable of doing. Ohio State beat Texas, for example. But Ohio State beat Texas because of Travion Henderson and Jack Sawyer. That's why they beat them by double digits. Otherwise, they would have just beaten them, but probably not by double digits. Georgia didn't have a single player with the athleticism of Henderson on offense. They did not. Not even a player of the caliber of Judkins or Smith. I mean, Georgia's offense was nowhere close to Ohio State's, outside of being better than them at tight end and when healthy, much better on the O-line. But they were just as banged up as Ohio State in the O-line, so very inconsistent. Very inconsistent. And they didn't have the play calling that Ohio State did there either. Defensively, they didn't have what Ohio State did. Did not have the DBs. They had probably similar caliber linebackers, but they also had the, in my mind, inferior DC. I think Knowles is better than Schumann. And their D-line wasn't as good. And yet, they combined, I think, for like 15 sacks or around that or more against Texas in both games. And they had, I think, around 30 TFLs. I mean, they physically kicked Texas's rear in a way that Penn State, Ohio State, or Notre Dame could only dream of doing to a team of inferior caliber to Texas. I mean, it was crazy. Now, they were inconsistent, yet again, but that was 2024 Georgia. We're talking about 2025. And regressing to the mean for Georgia means they play closer to the ceiling they showcased in 24, in my mind, than their floor in 24. I could be wrong. But doubting Kirby Smart's a dangerous game. I've played that roulette. Josh Pate has played that roulette. Many others have played it. I am tired of playing it. I'm done. Maybe I'll forget it, but I'm actually, you know what? I'm going to write it down on my show sheet right here. Don't doubt Kirby Smart. Not doing it. Actually, I'm going to write, I'm going to do something too here. I'm going to write Google Calendar below that so I can add this to my Google Calendar every day throughout the week. Just don't doubt Kirby Smart. Don't doubt Kirby Smart. It's going to be a notification for every day. Every day. Right when week 0 kicks off, it's going to every morning. Don't doubt Kirby Smart. Don't do it. And that's because they have questions on the rushing offense and questions at quarterback. Yes. And some questions on the O-line and potentially DB in terms of depth and consistency. But look at this schedule. They're minus 265 to reach the playoff, plus 300 to win the SEC. They lose that much. They had that poor of a year last year. And yet they're one of the top favorites. They're tied with Ohio State in odds to win it all, guys. Like, Vegas knows something that the people doubting Georgia do not know. They know something there. And Vegas has the best inside information in general with college football teams that you can find anywhere. They get Marshall at home week 1, so no opener with Clemson. Easy game, can probably pull out your starters at halftime against Marshall week 1. You get Austin Peay week 2. They traveled to Tennessee week 3, but Tennessee this year will be much worse than Tennessee last year. Georgia will gain a margin on Tennessee relative to the 2024 season because Tennessee loses Nico, lose their entire defensive front for the most part, lose a lot on the O-line, and they do not recruit or develop at the level that Georgia does. Week 4, they get a bye. They finally get Alabama in Sanford Stadium for the first time since 2015, and they will be favored in that game. They host Kentucky week 6. They travel to Auburn week 7. They host Ole Miss week 8. Ole Miss is going to get a whole lot worse than they were last year. They get, in week 9, a bye. They play Florida neutral field week 10, play at Mississippi State week 11, host Texas week 12. Again, getting Texas at home compared to on the road or even neutral field is huge. Host Charlotte week 13, and they play Georgia Tech, not even on the road, neutral field because of what their former athletic director Jay Batt did in terms of a deal to get Tech more revenue. They play them neutral field in week 14. This team, bringing in the second overall recruiting class in 2025, factoring in the portal and high school, and returning what they do. Look, I know, I am well aware that Georgia does lose a lot. I am also aware, though, that Stockton got starts or major playing time in exclusively big games, so that should help. I know that they return Nate Frazier, who, if he improves his ball security, will be a damn good running back. They bring in Josh McCray from the portal. All these players I mentioned, by the way, I have in my all-SEC teams. Some honorable mention, some higher than that. Drew Bobo, thinks going to be a good center. Micah Morris and Monroe Freeling are going to be awesome, guard and tackle respectively, and I think that Daniel Calhoun and Ernest Green III, some other starters, will be competent. I look at their wide receiver room, and they got Dylan Bell, who's okay, and you need that because last year they didn't even have okay. He's one of their better receivers. They got Zachariah Branch from the portal. They're bringing back Colby Young, and they bring in Noah Thomas from the portal. This might be the best Georgia wide receiver room in terms of depth that I can remember a Georgia team having in the 2020s. Now, you don't have a Ladd McConkey on the team. You don't have an A.D. Mitchell. But you have probably 3 maybe good or great wide receivers where even among the best Kirby Smart teams in 21 and 22, you really only had 2 great wide receivers, or 3 in 21, but that was when Pickens was finally healthy at the end of the year. So these receivers can stay healthy. It could be the deepest Georgia wide receiver we've seen in some time. Oscar Delpin, Loskin Lucky had somewhat inconsistent performances last year. I'd expect that to improve under elite tight ends coach Todd Hartley. You look at D-tackle, I love Christian Miller, Xavier McLeod, and Jordan Hall there, and they have depth too behind them. Gabe Harris Jr., Elo Medozi, and Joseph Jonah Ojanye. I love them, have them on my All-SEC team as well. Raylan Wilson, C.J. Allen, Chris Cole might make up the best linebacker room in America, if not for Texas. I like K.J. Bolden at safety and Dalen Everett at corner. They also, in my mind, Georgia has the best special teams unit in the country. Peyton Woodring at kicker, Brett Thorson at punter, and then Zachariah Branch is the return specialist. I mean, it's a lethal special teams unit that can help Georgia win some close games like they had to last year and like they may have to again this season. For context, I have not released my record prediction for Georgia yet, but I do have them winning 10 or 11 games and reaching the college football playoff. And my reasoning behind that, besides how they recruit and develop and the staff continuity, a huge part of that reason is Kirby Smart. Do not underestimate him. He will win in 2025 because, number one, the schedule is easier. You get Alabama, Ole Miss, and Texas at home, and Tennessee is a new QB. And Tennessee does not have the talent that you have if you're Georgia. I also imagine that injuries won't be as severe. Injuries were horrible for Georgia last year. Part of it was the schedule. Part of it was probably just straight up injury luck. I don't think the Bulldogs could get their O-line or running back room set all year last year, and I don't think those rooms or any other room will suffer injuries at a worse rate than they did last year. The odds of Stockton or whoever their starting QB is getting hurt in the same way Beck did at the end of the year is unlikely. Same with all the O-line and running back inconsistency and injuries they had. I think Beck was wildly turnover prone, and I think that Stockton or Puglisi, whoever they start there, and if Puglisi starts, I'd also view him as an all-SEC QB, probably has better passing potential than Stockton does, but scrambling potential, I don't know enough about him to comment on that. Regardless, I think that there will be less turnovers total and more consistency at QB than with Beck last year. Probably won't get the same upside, but I don't think you'll see the same floor either that nearly cost Georgia 4 games total. Georgia has staff continuity. They return all their 2024 starters, and most of them are elite. And then last but not least, he's the best head coach in college football. Because for Kirby Smart to win the SEC and go 2-0 versus Texas with the roster limitations, that was impressive. The only thing you can argue that may have been more impressive is what Ryan Day did. And Day had a better OC last year. a better DC, and an older roster, and a roster that didn't deal with quite as many injuries, and the regular season schedule was easier. So, I mean, Day and Smart, I think, are the two best coaches in America. I don't think anyone other than Smart is clearly ahead of Day. I also don't think that Day is at Smart's caliber, at least right now. He is the best game manager in football. To have 3 games where Beck throws 3 interceptions and has 3 or more turnovers, and then to go 2-1 in them, and the one loss is by 1 score, and the 2 wins are by double digits, that's insane. That's absolutely impressive. There were moments last year where it looked like Georgia had the number 1 defense, and where it looked like their offense had some consistency. Obviously, in the long run, wasn't consistent, wasn't fluid on either side of the ball. But I think this year you will see more consistency out of Georgia. I am high on them. You should be high on them. If you think they won't be top 10, check yourself. Now, you picking them to miss the playoff is a different story. Georgia can go 9-3. Absolutely. I mean, they can go 9-3 and actually improve in a power rating sense compared to last year, because they did win some close games. So if they improve power ratings wise, but just lose all their close games instead of splitting them, they can miss the playoffs. I mean, I don't think picking Georgia to miss the playoffs is a bold prediction, but saying they won't be top 10 in terms of quality, because you can be top 10 in quality, lose 3 games, and be left out. That happens. That happened last year. Ole Miss and Alabama were top 10 teams at the end of the year, especially Ole Miss. And I think it'll happen again this year. Could be to Georgia. Picking them to not be top 10 is an entirely different story. If Georgia is not a top 10 caliber team, with this schedule, they could go 8-4. They could even go 7-5. And I don't think 7-5 is possible. I would say 8-4 with Georgia is even unrealistic. And Smart's the best coach in America, in my mind. So to doubt Georgia, I think will only lead to your peril in 2025. Now let's talk about Texas and Colin Simmons, because this is something else that's crazy. We like to talk about the craziness of football, at college football with Sam. And we love to talk about it because crazy stuff happens. Crazy stuff happens. And because a lot of these experts make bad picks, and picks that I just don't think make sense overall. So we're going to talk about that right now and get into some Texas, and then we'll get into some of your questions. And I'll take these are questions from my Discord server, so I'll take 5, maybe 8 minutes at most to answer them. I won't spend much time on them just because they're questions, it's a long show, and I usually don't spend a lot of time on questions either, because I could turn questions into hour-long segments if I wanted to. I could in truth ramble about some of these for that long, but there are things I want to talk about. There are things that, make me money, that do well. A lot of the questions do. Some of them don't. The questions are just me giving back to you because you've given a lot to me. So 5 to 8 minutes for those. That should be good enough. I'm actually, I'm dehydrated. So quick commercial break. Commercial is in air quotes. I am going to take a 30-second water break. I will be right back. All of you who are on here, stay tuned, because we're going to be talking about Texas and then 5 more topics, all of whom are questions, some of whom are definitely asked by people who are live with us right now. And welcome in. Can't quite see me yet, but there. Found the camera node, and we're back. It's a trip up the stairs and down the stairs, because I'm upstairs, of course. But yeah, this has been an awesome show, really, guys. I mean, at one point we had close to, actually at one point we did hit 80 concurrent viewers, which is crazy. I mean, this is probably the most successful live show I've ever had, which is good. We're trending up. Consistency pays off. That's another life skill. It's just consistency pays off. And speaking of consistency, we're going to talk about Texas and their defensive improvement. The Texas Longhorns have improved on defense every year under Steve Sarkisian. From 2021 and that 5-7 record, and then you go all the way to 2022. Feel the great unit, especially at the beginning of the year. I will never forget watching that game against Alabama, thinking to myself, I cannot believe Texas is holding Bryce Young to minimal points and making life difficult for him. And then 2023, the secondary has a lot of holes, but it finishes as a top 15, top 10 defense in ESPN's efficiency, allowed fewer than 20 points per game. And last year, this is a fact that I actually disagree with, but it's interesting. ESPN's FPI viewed Texas as the number one defense last year, per their efficiency metrics. Texas was 1, Notre Dame was 2, Ohio State was 3. Now, I think Notre Dame was a paper tiger defense last year. It's a different topic, but I just think that the weak sauce schedule and the fact they didn't face any team with a good QB wide receiver duo, except for USC and Ohio State, really helped them. Really did. And their offense was all about running the ball, game control, and their defense was good at forcing turnovers and had some age, particularly in the secondary and defensive line. You look at Ohio State, I think they had the number one defense, but honestly, part of me understands the whole computers viewing Texas that way, because Texas never had a game like the Oregon game. Even against Ohio State, who ended the year with a better offense than what Oregon had, Texas never got torched in that way. They never had a performance anywhere close to that. When they allowed 30 points to Georgia, a lot of that was turnovers, Georgia getting some short fields, and Texas's offense not really having a good day. And then against Ohio State, they only gave up 21 offensive points. The other 7 were to Jack Sawyer on a scoop and score. The point being, this defense has showed you time and time again that they're getting better, and the talent roster is still upgrading. It's not quite where Steve Sarkisian wants it to be, and I think that is the number one overall roster in terms of talent in America combined with the best staff. I don't think it's quite there yet for Texas. It's close, though. And yet, I see people listing Colin Simmons as a player outside the top 50 as overall college football players, like the top 100 player lists. Or I see people viewing Texas as a team that's overrated because, well, Texas isn't back yet, which is stupid. They won the Big 12. They played in the SEC championship game. And I mean, if you're Georgia or you're an Ohio State fan or you're an Oklahoma fan and you're saying, oh, Texas isn't back yet. Well, if you're Oklahoma, Texas under Sark has a 500 record against you and a winning point differential. And if you're Georgia and Ohio State, they nearly beat you last year, and for much of the year were power rated higher than you. So, Texas is back. You don't need to win a title to be back. You just need to be in contention for one. Serious contention. They were never that under Tom Herman, never that under Charlie Strong. The final few years of the Mac Brown era, they never seriously were. And this year, and last year, and maybe for 2023, they actually were. So kudos to Texas there for leveling up their team and really leveling up their defense. I was a doubter for Texas entering 2024 overall. I actually thought they would miss the playoffs and be one of those teams that was power ranked top 10 like Ole Miss, but lose 3 games. And man, was I wrong. Very wrong. I mean, they finished the regular season 11-1 and a playoff lock. And they improved on defense. A huge part of the reason why I doubted Texas entering 2024 was honestly their defense. And the fact that their offense, while it returned all they did in the O-line, their O-line in 23 and also last year, while having a lot of talent, never quite hit that number one O-line in America in terms of college cohesiveness and consistent play. like we've seen from Georgia national championship teams or Washington or Oregon in 2023, for example. So that's why I doubted him, but I was wrong. And they went up to Michigan week 2, destroyed them, destroyed Oklahoma. The Georgia game was a shock. Hindsight's 2020, but that was their only regular season loss. Lost to Georgia again, although did a better job competing with them in the SEC championship game. And they competed with Ohio State there when Ohio State was blowing out or dominating everyone else in the college football playoff. So that was impressive. And the defense was a big part of the reason why they were one of the few teams in football to take steps forward from 23 to 24, or at least retain what they had. A lot of teams took steps back because 2024 was a down year relative to 2023, and you had a lot of COVID seniors leaving. But Texas took steps forward. At the absolute worst, stayed the same. And I think they became a better team in terms of the meta from 23 to 24. More balanced overall, especially on defense. Colin Simmons, though, is a player that you should pay attention to. I think he's the number one edge, but you should pay attention to him because even if Texas regresses at certain points on defense, and they lose guys like Jahdae Barron, the Thorpe Award winner, and they lose some linebackers, and they lose a lot of their defensive line. Simmons, as a freshman last year, put up these numbers. Let me read them for you. So he's 6'3", 243 pounds. Huge guy. In shape. Freak athlete. He's a sophomore this year from Dallas, Texas. He racked up 48 total tackles last year. 14 of them were tackles for loss. He had 9 sacks and 31 pressures. Crazy true freshman. I mean, he won a true freshman award over Jeremiah Smith, and I thought Jeremiah Smith was the best true freshman in the nation by a good margin last year. But wide receiver is a position that will always get more attention than D-end, for example, and Simmons was one of the best, just behind Jeremiah Smith last year. He had, again, 31 pressures, an 82.5 PFF grade, which was 42nd last year among FBS defensive ends. Probably better than that if you were to adjust for strength of schedule. And then he was 21st in pass rush grade with a 90. That's crazy. Insane. Again, as a true freshman and not even being a full-time starter, more of a rotational player, not just a solid starter in every game. Some other cool stats of his that he only missed 19.5% of his tackles. And I don't know if that's necessarily this amazing thing, but the fact that every 4 out of 5 of his tackles he makes as a freshman and as a defensive end, so you're not like a linebacker or a safety who's going to tackle much more than a defensive lineman, I just thought that was kind of impressive. And then he recorded 9 quarterback hits and I think also had an interception. So, freak athlete. I don't know why people have him outside of their top 50 player lists. I don't get that whatsoever. He's a freak. I mean, he's going to be a future first rounder. Could be pick 1 in round 1 one day whenever he declares for the NFL draft, likely in the 2027 NFL draft. I imagine he is a 3 and done, which is the equivalent to the college basketball 1 and done, but in football you have to play 3 years before you can get drafted, which is a rule that I hope stays the same. With where we're going in college football, not to go off on a tangent, I don't know if that will remain the case, but I hope it does. I like that in football you can't just be an amazing true freshman and then leave. I like that. I like that you have to stay. Their projected starting defense is as follows. Murad Watson and Cole Brevard at D-tackle. This is based on my projections, by the way. I factored in some of my projections, same with reading up on Texas and some of their team site depth charts and the R-Lads depth chart. Colin Simmons and Ethan Burke starting at defensive end or edge if you want to consider Simmons an outside linebacker. Burke's more of a traditional D-end. But D-end, edge, in some systems, outside linebackers, the same thing. Projected starting linebackers, you got Anthony Hill Jr. and Trey Moore. That's the best linebacker duo in America, and it is also the best linebacker group, factoring in their depth in America too. Kobe Black and Malik Muhammad are your projected starting corners, and you got Michael Taft, Jelani McDonald, and Jalen Gilbo as your safeties and nickelback. Look out for Alex January, especially for Murad Watson. Mention him twice because he's a transfer. Isn't listed on a lot of depth charts yet, but I think he's going to have a good year with Texas's development and the rotation to keep him fresh. Pay attention to Alex January, also at D-tackle, Colton Vasek at D-end, who, if he's healthy, can really make an impact, and also nickelback Jordan Johnson-Rubel. Pay attention to those names as well on the Texas defense. I also want to pan over and just talk about their team in general, how this defense can impact Texas. So I like Texas. Some Texas players that I have as All-Americans on the defensive side of the ball are as follows. I think that Cole Brevard is going to be an All-American this year at defensive tackle, really balled out at Purdue and is just in a better situation at Texas, will be better developed. I think Colin Simmons is the best edge in America, so I have him as the number 1 overall D-end, All-American for sure. Anthony Hill Jr., I think, is the best overall linebacker, and I also have Trey Moore on my All-American team. All-American lists for me are bigger than most, same with my all-conference teams, but still, I mean, they're awesome, Texas and linebacker and defense overall. I have Michael Taff and Jelani McDonald as All-Americans at safety, and I have Malik Muhammad as an honorable mention All-American cornerback. Pete Kwiatkowski has a good history of fielding good defenses, and this team overall, I think, is going to be strong at quarterback with Arch Manning this year. I think they're going to figure out running back with better health there. I like their tight ends, their receivers. I think their O-line will even reload. It should. And they have one of the best strength and conditioning programs in the country. So signing the number 1 overall class, portal and recruiting, returning what they do, developing and trending the way they have, I don't think the defense is a question. I think the question is whether they're talented enough to reload or improve, mostly as it relates to the offense, and whether or not the special teams unit can be better. I mean, they're minus 290 to reach the playoffs. Over under win total of 9.5. Their schedule is as follows. Week 1 at Ohio State. Week 2 they host San Jose State. Week 3 they host UTEP. They get a bye in week 4. They play Sam Houston at home week 5. Play at Florida week 6. Oklahoma they play neutral field week 7. They play at Kentucky week 8. At Mississippi State week 9. Host Vanderbilt week 10. They get a bye week 11. Play at Georgia week 12. Host Arkansas week 13. Host Texas A&M week 14. I will tell you, too, the last thing I'll say before we get off here is that the wrong team is favored in week 1. Texas should be the favorite over Ohio State, not the other way around. Ohio State is at home. It's obviously an advantage for them, but Texas returns more, about 3 percentage points more in returning production. They return more there. They return more starters. Their quarterback has more experience. They have better staff continuity. And the players they bring back on defense are better than the ones Ohio State does. I mean, Ohio State returns Igbinosun, who was super inconsistent last year and was probably the worst player for Ohio State on defense. They bring him back. Downs is the best in America, but Anthony Hill Jr. might be close to him relative to linebacker. And then they return Sonny Styles. Ohio State does. And Sonny Styles is not the linebacker that Anthony Hill Jr. is. Probably isn't even the linebacker that Trey Moore is. And Texas returns Taff. They return Malik Muhammad. They return Trey Moore. They return Anthony Hill Jr. They bring back Gilbo. They return Colin Simmons. It's just a lot, guys. And then they did more in the portal than Ohio State did, especially on defense. So, I mean, they got Murad Watson over Ohio State. Murad Watson was one of the only D tackles Ohio State pursued in the portal. So, wrong team's favored there, and a huge part of my logic behind that is Texas's defense. It's the same thing for why I know some people are worried about Texas traveling to Florida. I'm a little worried about it too. At the same time, I have a much easier time seeing Texas push around Florida's defense than Florida push around Texas's defense. I mean, even if Lagway is generational, this Texas defense might be generational. And at that point, there's definitely a path for Texas to win and even win big, even if Lagway pans out to his ceiling. And a lot of people are picking that. So that might be something that's obvious. He also may be a little bit overvalued. I love Texas's defense. Colin Simmons is, I think, going to be a unanimous All-American this year. Don't know how you could think otherwise. Don't undervalue this unit. I think at the very worst, Texas will have the second best defense in the country in 2025. And now this is the fun part. We get to your questions now. We answer your questions here on College Football with Sam. I'm going to probably spend only 5 minutes on each of these just because we've been live for almost 2.5 hours, and I have packing to do. I, again, have work to do with a family friend, helping him do stuff, and I want to get at least an hour and a half, if not 2 hours there, and I'm already pushing it. So 5 minutes, and it'll probably be the standard moving forward because the longer the preseason goes on, the closer we get to the regular season, there's going to be more I'm going to have to talk about, but I'll still answer your questions always and try and get to 5 or 6 per Wednesday. And that'll be a thing in the regular season too. Withdrawal Wednesdays will be a thing just like they are today. I want to talk about trap games in the Big Ten. This question was asked by Drew Allerseason via my Discord server. Join that via the link in the description. Navigate to the hashtag YouTube mailbox channel and ask me a question. And I will eventually make a video about it if it is a interesting topic and if it's relevant. And most of them are interesting and relevant. So Drew Allerseason asked me, what do you think some trap games are for each Big Ten team? Some spots that could be tough for the better team, whether they're going on the road or they're coming back home after a big game, sort of like Ohio State and Nebraska last year. That was a trap game. Or think about Indiana-Washington last year. That was a trap game. Michigan against Minnesota, I think, was a trap game last year. And I could go on and on and on. I mean, Texas against, just trying to think, for some other big teams. I don't know if Texas had much of a trap game last year, if I'm being honest. I think Arizona State, to a certain degree, may have been. Maybe Clemson even in the first round. Even though it was playoff games, Texas was way better than those teams and should have beaten them by more. Georgia against Georgia Tech, that was a total trap game. But let's keep it on the Big Ten, and let's dive in right now and talk about them, just very briefly. So from the top, we have Ohio State. Ohio State at Washington, at Illinois, and at Wisconsin. All road games. Teams Ohio State should be favored by double digits, if not more, against, but they're on the road, and those teams either have more to gain than Ohio State does in those games. They're improving, most of them, by power ratings, and Ohio State's getting worse, and again, they're on the road. And Illinois and Wisconsin are back-to-back road games, so I think especially there in the trip to Seattle, trap games. Penn State at Iowa. Iowa's a tough place to play, and then Indiana at home after the Ohio State game could be a letdown spot. Oregon, Indiana at home, Rutgers on the road, Iowa on the road, USC, and then Wisconsin on the road. A lot of trap games for Oregon. Don't have a lot of big games, but a lot of spots to mess up. Michigan at Nebraska, hosting Wisconsin, hosting Washington, traveling to MSU. Should be better than all those teams. Nebraska actually is barely an underdog to Michigan, so by spread it's not a trap game, but by public perception I think that'll be a trap game for Michigan. Indiana, road trips to Iowa and hosting MSU, I think those are trap games. For Illinois, at Duke, not easy non-conference game. At Purdue, Rutgers, and at Wisconsin. For Nebraska, Cincinnati to open up the year. Michigan State and at UCLA are trap games. For USC, Michigan State, at Illinois, Iowa, and then UCLA at home. Those are some trap games. Iowa has a tough schedule, so I almost said they didn't have trap games, but Iowa should be definitively better than 4 or 5 of their opponents and able to punch with all but maybe one of their remaining opponents. So I think Rutgers on the road and Michigan State at home late in the year could be trap games. Washington, at Washington State, at Maryland, at UCLA. Just travel or the rivalry for Washington against Washington State makes those trap games. Minnesota, at California, Rutgers, and then Northwestern. I think those are trap games. Boston College and UCLA at home for Michigan State. Don't have a lot of games where they're going to be favored in, but they should be better than UCLA and Boston College and favored. Wisconsin, schedule's so tough that they don't have a trap game. Rutgers has Maryland at home as a trap game. UCLA has at UNLV, Maryland at home, and Washington at home as trap games. Maryland just has NIU as their trap game. Yes, Maryland can go 2-10 this year. Northwestern is at Tulane, Purdue at home, and yeah, those are their trap games, and I don't think Purdue is a single trap game. Much like Wisconsin, tough schedule, not as tough, but they're a much worse quality team, so therefore you don't really have a trap game. Some teams with landmines all over the schedule. These are teams that have a bunch of trap games, or at least they could lose more than one of their trap game. Oregon and Illinois. Illinois is the hunted after 10-3, and I don't quite think they have the depth or coaching that Indiana does. And while they don't have the same amount of big games that Indiana does, I feel like they're a little bit potentially overvalued. I think people may be overlooking Indiana again, and they have a tougher non-conference than Indiana. Oregon, you got 5 trap games, and many of them are East Coast trips. Rutgers, East Coast, Iowa, closer to the East Coast than West, and then Washington, Washington hasn't lost a home game since, I think, 2021. Tough spots. So programs with a lot of trap games are hard ones, but they are manageable, more manageable than Oregon and Illinois. Ohio State, you're hunted, much like Illinois. You have road games that could be losses, but you have NFL talent, and you have Ryan Day instead of Brett Bielema, so it's very manageable. USC, several teams that can punch with you, but you can also punch with them. And unlike Oregon, you don't have the same, I think, drastic travel. Manageable, but could be must-see TV, I think, are Michigan. You have several games like Nebraska, Wisconsin, Washington at MSU with good quarterback play, potentially. For Nebraska, you play several turtle teams. And by turtle teams, I mean teams that have good trenches and that are perfectly content just sitting on a lead and running the ball. Like Cincinnati, Michigan, Minnesota. I think Michigan State could be that team and will be in games against better opponents because Jonathan Smith's a good coach. And how do you beat a better opponent? Well, you take the game and you just do this. You compress it and you run and you do what Kentucky and Nebraska did to Ole Miss and Ohio State, respectively. And then if you're Lane Kiffin, you lose that game. And if you're Ryan Day, you typically win that game. They also have no guarantees, these teams, but just a few trap games. Wisconsin, need I say more? You don't have many trap games because you have no guaranteed wins, or almost none of them. The only trap game they might have is Maryland at home. And then Rutgers, you have one. Again, Maryland at home. That's just because Maryland, I think, is going to be really bad. But Rutgers is a super tough schedule, much like the Wisconsin Badgers. Very good question, Drew Allerseas, and thank you so much for asking that question. I really appreciate it, and make sure to ask me more questions if you have the time. You know where it is. Discord server, link in the description. Join that, and that's how you can ask me questions. The Big Ten is going to be must-see TV this year. And I think the amount of trap games per team and the amount of good teams the Big Ten has is evidence of that. Up next, we do have Notre Dame. Why are people viewing Notre Dame in an unserious manner? That's the question that the final quarter asks. The final quarter asks me, why aren't people viewing Notre Dame as a serious threat? He asked that question via my Discord server, which if you join and navigate to the hashtag YouTube Mailbox channel, links in the description, you too can ask me a question. I will make it into a video. Notre Dame finished 14-2 last year, and they lost in the national championship game and had a failed comeback against Ohio State, but a comeback that I think showed that Freeman's done a very good job of instituting mental toughness, which is important. A lot of people are overlooking Notre Dame's culture and mental toughness and recruiting and development. That's very fair. I personally am maybe lower on Notre Dame than some people are because I think Notre Dame has some roster limitations with what they lose after 2024, entering 2025. I mean, they only return 56% of their production. Their preseason S&P Plus is a 24.9, which is 6th. However, they have an extreme quarterback identity change. Their O-line should be one of the best in America, and their wide receiver room should improve, but they do have some questions at tight end. And while I think offensively they'll be the same as last year, or maybe even better, definitely a higher upside with Carr's arm, if healthy, and if he is who we think he is, the defense takes big steps back. But I want to focus on the positive with Notre Dame, because I do get what you're saying here in your question, the final quarter, that some people are underestimating them. Freeman is building a monster. Freeman, I think, is building a bowling ball. I believe that this team in the future is going to be hard to stop. I think that they are going to be a blend of... They're going to be a blend of the old Brian Kelly Notre Dame. They're going to be a blend of the Luke Fickell Cincinnati team. That's because a lot of the former staffers that were on that Fickell team, including Freeman, are now with Notre Dame. And I think they're also going to be a blend of... Just trying to think to myself, who could they be a blend of? I have a hard time coming up with an analogy recruiting-wise. I really do. But I think they're going to be a lot like, some of their local Midwest teams that have punched above their weight class and have also been able to accumulate great talent. So I think recruiting-wise, they're going to be a little bit Walmart, Ohio State-like. Going to try and balance things out, but not afraid to go to skill positions and especially level up recruiting on defense. I think that in terms of identity-wise, they are going to be like Cincinnati. Mike Denbrock and what he ran there, also LSU, but still was at Cincinnati for a little bit there. That's going to be, I think, the same track record they want to use developmentally. I think in terms of grit, they're going to be like the Michigan teams of recent memory, a little bit of development from there too. And to harken back to a different era, I think some of the better Paul Chryst teams is what Notre Dame wants to be like in terms of what they are known for, their bread and butter, the offensive line, the ground and pound, the physical defense that you may injure them, you may beat them once, but you will not break them. You just won't. I believe in Freeman long term, and I think that with how young he is and with how much he has to learn and how they are not where they want to be in terms of roster talent, I think he will eventually win them a natty. But will that be within the next 5 years or next 10 years or 15 or 20? Because I think Freeman's going to be there forever with how young he is and how he talks about Notre Dame, though you never know. We'll have to see. At the end of the day, I think that people underestimate Notre Dame because of the stink of Brian Kelly, because of the losses to G5 teams under Freeman. He's had 2, so they're not flukes. He's had them. He plays to his opponent. He'll play lower when he faces a lower opponent. He'll play high when he faces a higher opponent. I mean, 2023 was the epitome of that. Think about how they got shanked and bled out to Louisville, and almost the same thing happened to them against Clemson, and yet they nearly beat an Ohio State team who I think was the second best team in America that year. Just straight up. That's who Notre Dame is under Freeman, and they will probably always be that way. They, play at an inferior, lower level against lower competition, higher level against the best teams they play. That's what they were last year, what they were in 2022, what they were in 2023 as well. That's why I think people underestimate him. I do think there are legitimate reasons, though, to think that this team will regress compared to last year, or that they are not a national championship team quite yet. Contender, sure, but there's a difference between a contender and someone who's likely to win it. I mean, look at their schedule. They play Miami week 1, and they play A&M week 3, and then they get USC at home week 8. Those are very losable games, especially Miami on the road week 1, when Miami will have the experience edge at QB and home field advantage. And then you cannot tell me that, and apologies again, I had this happen last time I talked about Notre Dame. I really have to fix this. Boise State and the bye week in week 9 should not have the graphics that they do, but it didn't save. It was an issue not with me, but with my my software. Just didn't save properly. It's a good software 99% of the time. It's just the 1% of the time that something didn't save that should have. They have a lot of losable games. I mean, what happens if Arkansas hits a little bit in the portal and maybe Notre Dame is kind of sleepy against them? And then you factor that in with A&M and Miami having acquired more roster talent in recent memory, and they return more, especially at quarterback. Same with USC. I mean, Notre Dame, I think, can lose 3 games this year. Their over-under win total is 10.5, but it's juiced heavily to the under. So 9-3, 10-2, 11-1 are the likely outcomes. They could miss the playoffs. They could also make it. They could also, if everything goes right for them, I think win it all. So to answer your question, why people aren't taking Notre Dame as a serious threat, I think it's losing Xavier Watts. I think it's replacing Mike Denbrock with Chris Ash. I think it's the change at quarterback, that Leonard was much more experienced and more athletic than CJ Carr. And it's not like Carr was viewed as a generational guy coming out of high school, and he's coming off of an injury. So in a sense, it's almost like they're starting a true freshman. Mentally, no. But physically, coming off that injury, to a certain degree, you could argue that. Those are my reasons, and I think the reasons of other people who don't like Notre Dame this year who've done their research. The general public, though, I think the general public isn't taking Notre Dame as a serious threat for very incorrect reasons, for stereotypes about Notre Dame, for what they were under Brian Kelly, not what they were right now, and certainly what they won't be moving forward under Marcus Freeman. So thank you, the final quarter, for asking that question. I very much appreciate it. Okay, gosh, my nose is itchy. That's how I know it's getting hot. It's heating up because my green screen blocks the air vent when I use it. But good news is we're done with that. Now we're just on to a few more topics. Just a few more. 5 minutes each, and then we will be out of here. Let me check the chat, see if there's any more super chats, see what you guys are saying. Still got 50 concurrent viewers and 36 likes, which is insane. But regardless. Now we're going to talk about Matt Patricia and Ohio State. That's what we're going to talk about now. Just had a little bit of a brain fart there, guys. Matt Patricia is Ohio State's new defensive coordinator. And the Peanut Butter Prophet is wondering, one of my viewers asks me a question in my Discord server, and I answer questions from my Discord server in video format. Fun fact. So you should join my Discord server. Links in the description. He asks me what I think some differences will be between Matt Patricia and between Jim Knowles in terms of how will Ohio State's defense function, maybe how they'll play as it relates to this year. It's a very general question, so I'm going to take some time and answer that for you here. Ohio State in 2024 finished with the number 1 scoring, number 1 total, and number 1 points allowed per play defense. It was a wonderful, wonderful unit. I think Jim Knowles is the best DC in the country. So PSA, I do think that you will see a defensive coordinator drop off, but I don't know how big it will be. I think Knowles is so good that it will probably be big, but that's just my opinion. And I want to focus more on Patricia's schemes and the talent that exists on this defense, not, comparing the caliber of defensive coordinators that I think Jim Knowles and Matt Patricia are. So the new look on defense for Ohio State will be more of a multiple defense. Knowles was a strict 4-2-5 guy, occasionally flashed a 3-3-5 or occasionally flashed, I think, a dime defense at times with like a 3-2-6, but strictly a nickel 4-2-5 guy for the most part, and then the triangle 3 safety look. Patricia wants to run a 4-3 or a 3-4 defense. He'll run nickel if it's needed. I was listening to him talk on Julian Edelman's podcast about how they, at the Patriots, always adjusted their defense to their personnel. I mean, he is very, very wide in terms of possibilities for how his defense will align. So it's a multiple defense. Comparing it to Jim Knowles in terms of style, Patricia's defense uses more formations and wants linebackers and DNs involved, or more so edges, I think, more than defensive tackles or traditional defensive linemen. Knowles is very much about having the D-line active in the game, very much so. You saw that last year. In 2023, you didn't see it in pass rush, but you saw it in run defense. Patricia more so wants the defensive line to eat up blocks that the linebackers can get engaged, whereas Knowles is about, using the linebackers and safeties in a variety of diverse ways to help the defensive line do their job. Further comparisons, I think, warrant that Knowles favors keeping things in front of him and being aggressive when it best suits him. I mean, he's the nation's best DC, so there's versatility in his defense as well. But he likes to keep things in front of him, and at times play a bend but don't break. I think Patricia more so favors aggression, and I think something you'll see from Ohio State this year is there's a good chance they'll force more turnovers than last year, or the same amount, but with how much they replace, it'll be more impressive, the amount of turnovers they force compared to last year. I think that Knowles is the best in the nation, but Patricia will be good. How good is ultimately the question. At Ohio State, top 5 defenses are expected. I don't know if they'll reach that here, but with Patricia and with what they bring back, it is certainly possible. Looking at this defense here, you got Caden McDonald and Edric Houston at D-tackle, Kenyatta Jackson Jr. and Bo Atkinson at edge, Arvell Reese and Sonny Styles at linebacker, Jermaine Matthews Jr. and Davison Igbinosun at corner, Caleb Downs and Jalen McClain at safety, and Lorenzo Styles Jr. at nickel. Pay attention to Peyton Pierce. Pay attention to Devin Sanchez, Malik Hartford, and nickelback Bryce West. Peyton Pierce, linebacker, Sanchez, Hartford, and West are all DBs. It's going to be interesting seeing what Patricia does at Ohio State for sure. I'm inclined to think that you are going to see some struggles early because having to run a multiple defense and everyone knowing what they're doing is going to be complicated. I think early on you are going to see some pretty big hiccups and struggles. But I think as the year goes on, and as they learn Patricia and Patricia learns them, they'll get better. I don't know if they'll be a top 10 defense. I certainly think they'll be top 15, and I'm inclined to say top 10. Don't know if they'll be top 5, but you won't see the drop off that you had from Hafley to Combs for sure. You will not see anything close to that. That's what Ohio State's defense will look like under Matt Patricia. It'll be more of a multiple look. You'll see 4 linebackers at times. I think as the season goes on, 3 linebackers will probably be the most customary. So at times less DBs or fewer DBs or fewer defensive linemen, especially defensive tackles. And he really wants to get the linebackers especially involved, which I don't know if Ohio State has 4 linebackers that could come out and it not at times be a liability, but I know they have 3 that would come out and not be a liability. And who's saying that the 4th linebacker wouldn't be a D-end, that they can move to outside linebacker and he can function as that. So it's going to be a great defense, I think, for Ohio State this year under Matt Patricia. We'll ultimately see how it pans out. Thank you for asking that question, the Peanut Butter Prophet. I really appreciate it. Okie dokie. We have a question, a few more about Georgia Tech, a few more about Wisconsin. I know I just flashed my Georgia Tech question, but we've been live for 2 hours and 45 minutes. We have. So I'm actually going to get to my Wisconsin question tomorrow because I want to think more about it before answering it. So I'm going to get to that tomorrow. And yes, I just teased that I'm going live on Thursday, but we've only been live. We've been live 3 times this week, but the Monday show was not up to my expectations, so I only counted as 2. We will at least be live tomorrow, at least. So I'm going to get through this Georgia Tech segment since I did tease it, and then tomorrow we'll talk about Wisconsin as well. We'll talk about Wisconsin tomorrow, or maybe after the segment I'll just decide, hey, I'm going to push through and get this done. What are my thoughts on Georgia Tech entering 2025? Well, I'm glad you asked that question, and by you, I mean Windjammer Harpoon. It's a pretty cool name. If you want to ask a question like Windjammer Harpoon and have me answer it in a video, join my Discord server and ask me a question in the hashtag YouTube mailbox section. The Discord server link is in the description. I love Georgia Tech. I love Brent Key. They finished 7-6, 5-3 in ACC play, and lost the Birmingham Bowl in pretty bad fashion to Vanderbilt. But Vanderbilt punched above its weight class last year, and I love Georgia Tech because I think Brent Key right now is a top 10 head coach. I think their staff is wonderful, and Haynes King's a top 10 quarterback in America when healthy. They have plus 730 odds to reach the college football playoff. I love those odds, and I love the over on their 7.5 preseason win total. Their ACC odds, too, at plus 1,400 implies that Vegas thinks this team can get to Charlotte and can win the ACC. Let's look at their schedule, and then we'll talk about their roster, too. So they open up against Week 1 at Colorado. They should win that game. Gardner-Webb in Week 2 obviously should be a win. Clemson at home Week 3. If Tom Allen hasn't figured out the running defense yet, and that'll be more likely as the year goes on, not as likely early, and King is healthy, and Tech is humming on offense, that could be a win. Temple Week 4 should be a win. Wake Forest Week 5 on the road, even though it's on the road, should be a win. After the bye Week 6, they host Virginia Tech in Week 7, play at Duke Week 8, host Syracuse Week 9, play at NC State Week 10. In Week 11, they have a bye. Week 12, they play at Boston College. Week 13, they host Pittsburgh. And Week 14, they play Georgia in a neutral field. I think between Clemson and Georgia, they will beat one of those teams this year. I just think Georgia Tech has more experience than Georgia, nearly beat them last year, played them competitively in 2023, and I think the time they get Clemson and the matchup they have against Clemson is advantageous. I think they will, when they face in Week 3, I think Tech will have the better run defense and, more importantly, the better run offense, or at least by a wider margin than Clemson does. At the time they play, as the year goes on, I think Clemson will have the better run defense, but Tech has more. I don't know. I think Clemson's run defense issues last year, in large part, were due to Goodwin, but I think they have more to fix there than just exchanging or changing defensive coordinators. The question for Tech is whether or not Haynes King can stay healthy. And does Tech have the depth to avoid upsets? My concerns for the Yellow Jackets really surround tight end and also linebacker. And most of that just points back to roster depth. I think the starting roster for this team is pretty good. Depth is just a question. Same with quarterback health and D end too, although I like Ronald Triplett pretty good. I observe the offense though, and like Haynes King I have as a first team all ACC QB. Same with Jamal Haynes, first teamer at running back. I love Keelan Rutledge. I think that they replaced Eric Singleton in the portal with Eric Rivers. I think Singleton's better, but Rivers I think is close. And getting Dean Patterson also from FIU was huge. Jordan Vandenberg and Akello Stone is the second best defensive tackle group in the ACC. It's only behind Clemson, but it is that good. And that is going to be a non-negotiable and a huge help to Georgia Tech and their new defensive coordinator. I believe their new defensive coordinator's name is Blake Gideon. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. Oh, yes, it is. Yes, it is. I knew that. That's how you know I've done my research is I know a lot of Georgia Tech players and their staffers, too. Buster Faulkner, I think, is one of the best play callers in America, too, and learned under Todd Monken. They have 48 incoming players. They return 65% of their production, which is 18th. Their S&P Plus, I think, at 4.7 is pretty low at 44th nationally. 4.7. I think that's pretty low. I think the general public and even Vegas is underestimating Georgia Tech. Could I be wrong? Absolutely, I could be wrong. But I don't think I am. I love Tech and Brent Key entering 2025. I think they will be in the playoff hunt in November. I strongly believe that, actually. Not just think, I strongly believe they will be in the playoff hunt come November. So thank you. Someone asked me a question about Georgia Tech, and it's a team that I'm high on. So I'm happy. I'm happy to talk about it. Thank you, Windjammer Harpoon, for discussing Georgia Tech. Really appreciate it. Alrighty. I think I have one more in me. So we are going to finish this out talking about Wisconsin. CJ says, let's go, and then says 11-1. 11-1 is actually possible with Georgia Tech. I'm not picking them to do that quite, but it's possible. Final question, everyone. Last question, last but not least. Pop-Tart, cool name. His profile photo on Discord where he asked me this question is from the Pop-Tart Bowl. He asks me, is this a make or break year for Luke Fickell? And if you want to ask me a question and have me answer it, like I am with Pop-Tart's question, make sure to join my Discord server. Links in the description. Navigate to the hashtag YouTube mailbox channel and ask me a question. Is this a make or break year for Luke Fickell? He's entering his third year with Wisconsin with a 13-13 record. Yes. Yes. This is a make or break year for Luke Fickell. It is. I cannot say that enough. It's absolutely a make or break year, and I'm going to tell you why. It's a make or break year because Wisconsin on a year-to-year basis should expect to go bowling at worst. They had that streak extending back to Barry Alvarez, survived through Gary Anderson, Brett Bielema, Paul Chryst, even through some of their worst seasons, and it ended under Fickell. He needs to regain the good graces of Wisconsin fans, and I think at least go bowling. That's what I think he has to do. The Badgers should win 8-9 games per year, and then occasionally punching up by 1 or 2 games to hit 10 or 11 when they have easier schedules, when they have harder schedules or a down year record-wise, regressing to 7 or 6 wins. That's what I think the expectations should be at Wisconsin. If I'm wrong, if you think I'm wrong, correct me. And then you look at their playoff odds at plus 3,500. It's much lower than Nebraska's playoff odds, and roster-wise, they're similar to Nebraska. Their schedule's just way harder. So that's why it's a do-or-die year, even though I think they only need 6 wins. If they had an easier schedule, they'd need 7, for sure. Maybe even 8. But when you play, you get Miami of Ohio at week 1, you get Middle Tennessee State at home week 2, but you play at Alabama week 3. Maryland in week 4 at home is the easiest game you get, and Maryland isn't Purdue bad. From week 5 to week 10, those are the byes that Wisconsin has. Week 6, you play at Michigan. Week 7, you host Iowa. Week 8, you host Ohio State. Week 9, you travel to Oregon. There's some travel mixed into all of this. And then off the bye, Week 10, host Washington, travel to Indiana, host Illinois, travel to Minnesota. Your second easiest conference game is against who? Like Minnesota, Illinois, or Iowa? Teams who've beaten you in recent memory? There's a world where Wisconsin goes 3-9, guys, or even 4-8. For them to go 6-6 means they're probably a top 25 or at least top 30 caliber team in power rankings. If they go 7-5 or 8-4, they're top 25, top 20 in power ratings, which would be crazy, and I would love to see it happen. I don't know if it will. I'm inclined to think Fickle survives at least into 2026, so I do think they go bowling, but getting more than 6 regular season wins is just such an ask with this schedule. It really is. I think at best, with everything working towards them, they'll go 8-4. And at the absolute worst, I think they go 3-9. Realistically, I think their options are pretty compressed. I think 5-7, 6-6, or 7-5 are the really realistic outcomes here. And when your Big Ten strength of schedule rank is first looking at the conference games, then you factor in Alabama. My goodness. I mean, it's going to be tough. It's a make or break year for Fickle. I'll tell you a reason why it could work. Reason why it could work is they went into the portal and they got Billy Edwards and they got really, I think, big-time defensive linemen compared to recent Wisconsin standards on the D-line. They upgraded D-line in a major way, especially D-end, getting Corey Walker from Western Michigan and Mason Reiger from Louisville. They have Christian Allegro and Tackett Curtis and return other experienced vets at linebacker. Preston Zachman, Austin Brown, Nizier Forqueen, and Ricardo Hallman. That makes up one of the best secondaries in the Big Ten. So I think Mike Tressel should have his best defense that he's had with the Badgers. And then at wide receiver, Vinny Anthony could be someone who contends for 1,000 receiving yards, and I think Trechka Kahuna is pretty good too. And they bring back Riley Malaman and Jake Renfro on the O-line, and I still think Wisconsin has done a decent job recruiting and developing there. Those are some reasons why they could work out and win 6 or 7 games this year, and therefore it's a make-or-break year, and Fickle makes it. Fickle could also break his back in the sense that so many teams on his schedule are so good that he goes 5-7 and improves, but at that point you're making the fan base mad, and the fan base and the donors, their opinions is what matters. And Billy Edwards Jr., let's see, he's probably going to be worse than whoever starts at Alabama. I venture he'll be worse than Bryce Underwood at Michigan, could be worse than Gronowski at Iowa, will be worse than Sayan, will be worse than Dante Moore, probably will be worse than DeMond Williams, probably will be worse than Fernando Mendoza, worse than Altmaier. Already, in the majority of your games, you probably will have a worse QB. And heck, maybe if Minnesota plays out their cards right, maybe Drake Lindsey's better, or maybe Maryland actually upgrades at quarterback. I mean, there's just so many games where you won't have the QB advantage, and I also don't think Wisconsin's staff is outer worldly. And they're probably a little bit used to losing, the staff and roster is, and not in a good way. Not in the motivating way, but in the way of Fickle won a bunch at Cincinnati. He gets to Wisconsin, is facing the pressure, and he regressed from year 1 to year 2, and this schedule's super tough. I think it will work. I do, but that is far, far from a guarantee of it working out. This is a make-or-break year for Luke Fickle. Great question, Pop-Tart. I think Fickle makes it, but there's a chance that the portal additions don't pan out. If the O-line regresses due to some losses, and I don't know what caliber running backs they have, they need some stuff to go right for him to make it, for sure. Good question. All right, guys, I need to get off right now. Pack, get to some other work, and then travel up north. Thank